Hello guys, welcome to Phoenix What If. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto awakened Bloodline of Demon and got Harem? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. Echoes of the Oni. The mist wasn't just thick, it was suffocating. It clung to the unfinished steel of the great Naruto bridge like a shroud, muffling sound and stealing warmth. Every breath was a lungful of damp, cold air that tasted of salt and blood. For Naruto Uzumaki, it was the taste of failure. Sasuke lay crumpled near a support pillar, his chest still, his skin a waxy, unnatural white. He wasn't just unconscious, he looked empty. A faint, dark vapor, like heat haze on a winter's day, still coiled from his still form, drawn toward the man standing over him. The man's name was Kageyama, and he smiled like a hyena that had just cornered a fawn. He was a late arrival, an associate of Gato's that Zabuza had failed to mention, and his technique was a thing of nightmares. He didn't just kill, he consumed. Such a vibrant life force, Kageyama mused. His voice a low, gravelly hum that scraped against the nerves. He licked his lips, a thin, serpentine tongue flicking out to taste the air. The Uchiha are always a delicacy. So much pride, it gives their chakra a spicy finish. 50 feet away, Kakashi was locked in a deadly dance with Zabuza Momochi. The demon of the mist fought with a frantic, cornered animal ferocity. His massive executioner's blade swung in arcs meant to cleave, to maim, to end things quickly. Gato's betrayal had stripped him of his usual cold professionalism, leaving behind a raw, desperate killer. Kakashi, his Sharingan blazing, met every strike, the screech of metal on metal the only punctuation in the oppressive quiet. But he was pinned, unable to help his students. His gaze flickered for a single, agonizing second toward Sasuke's still form, and in that second, Zabuza's blade nearly took his head. He couldn't look away again. Naruto was bleeding from a dozen shallow cuts, his orange jumpsuit torn and stained dark with grime and his own blood. He and Haku had fought to a standstill, a whirlwind of Senbon and Kunai. But the fight had changed the moment Kageyama had taken Sasuke down. Haku, ever loyal, had immediately disengaged, forming a wall of ice mirrors around Zabuza's back, a desperate attempt to guard his master from the wild card they had been forced to accept as an ally. It was a defensive posture. The battle's momentum was broken. Now, only Naruto and Sakura stood between Kageyama and the bridge builder, Tazuna, who was huddled behind them, trembling. Quote, Naruto. Sakura's voice was a ragged whisper. Her hands were shaking as she clutched a kunai, her knuckles white. She was terrified, but she hadn't run. She was standing her ground, a small, pink-haired bastion of defiance against an encroaching nightmare. Kageyama's smile widened, his gaze sliding from the drained Uchiha to Sakura. Oh, good. The appetizer is finished. Now for the main course. He took a slow step forward. His movements unnervingly fluid, like a predator confident that its prey had nowhere left to run. Don't worry, little girl. I'll be gentle. I find that the life force comes away so much sweeter when the source is screaming. Something inside Naruto snapped. It wasn't a thought. It wasn't a decision. It was a deep, primal severance of the boy he had been from the thing he was about to become. The jeers of the villagers, the loneliness of his apartment, the desperate need for acknowledgement, all of it boiled away in a sudden, volcanic surge of pure, unadulterated rage. He saw Sasuke, his rival, his brother in all but blood, lying like a discarded doll. He saw Sakura, trembling but resolved, placing herself in the path of a monster to protect their client. He saw Kakashi-sensei, fighting for his life, unable to help them, and he felt the cage in his gut, the one that held the great beast, the nine-tailed fox, begin to splinter. You, Naruto's voice was a low growl, a sound that came from his chest. Not his throat. You won't touch her. A familiar, searing red chakra began to bubble to the surface, wrapping around him like a cloak of fire. It was the Kyuubi's power, hot and violent. Kageyama paused, his eyes widening with a flicker of avarice. Well, what's this? A Jinchuriki. Gato failed to mention that the meal came with a side of demon. He laughed, a dry, rattling sound. Excellent. I've always wanted to taste the chakra of a tailed beast. The red chakra flared, and Naruto's eyes shifted, the pupils elongating into feral slits. His canines sharpened, and his whisker marks deepened. Becoming jagged and raw, he lunged, a blur of orange and red, his movements faster and stronger than before. But it was a clumsy rage, unfocused and wild. Kageyama sidestepped the attack with ease, his hand lashing out like a snake. His palm, covered in swirling, ink-like tattoos, slapped against Naruto's chest. Naruto gasped, the red chakra sputtering as if doused with water. A crippling weakness washed over him. He felt his own energy being pulled, siphoned away through the point of contact. It was the same technique that had taken Sasuke down. Such power, Kageyama hissed, his eyes alight with greedy pleasure. So much life. You're a feast, boy. A veritable banquet. Naruto staggered back, clutching his chest, his breath coming in ragged pants. The Kyuubi's chakra was fighting back, replenishing what Kageyama was taking, but it was a losing battle. He could feel his life force being leached away, the cold emptiness spreading from his chest outward. He was going to die. Just like Sasuke. Sakura would be next. Then Kakashi-sensei. Then Tazuna. They would all die here, on this half-finished bridge in this forgotten country, and it would be his fault. Because he was too weak. Weak. The word echoed in a place deeper than his mind. A place of echoing silence and ancient, slumbering darkness. Weak. Is that what we are? The voice wasn't the Kyuubi's. The fox was a creature of rage and fire, its voice a roaring inferno. This was something else. It was cold, ancient, and filled with a terrifying, resonant power. It was the sound of a tombstone cracking. The sound of a mountain's heart breaking. As Kageyama advanced, ready to deliver the final, draining blow, something fundamental inside Naruto shifted. The Kyuubi's chakra, which had been fighting so desperately against Kageyama's jutsu, suddenly recoiled. It wasn't suppressed, it was consumed. Swallowed whole by a power that erupted from the very core of Naruto's being. A wave of oppressive, absolute cold slammed out from him. The mist, already thick, grew preternaturally heavy, swirling around Naruto in a vortex of gray. The air temperature plummeted. Frost, stark and white, spider webbed across the steel girders beneath his feet. Everyone on the bridge froze, a primal, instinctual terror gripping them. Zabuza, in the middle of a swing, faltered, his eyes wide with disbelief. Kakashi stumbled back, his Sharingan spinning frantically, trying to process what it was seeing. It wasn't just chakra, it was something other, something wrong. Haku's ice mirrors cracked, not from a physical blow, but from the sheer pressure radiating from Naruto's position. Kageyama, who had been savoring his victory, stopped dead. The smug, predatory grin fell from his face, replaced by a mask of slack-jawed horror. The energy he was siphoning from Naruto had changed. It was no longer the hot, vibrant chakra of a Jinchuriki. It was a torrent of icy, malevolent power that was now flooding up his arm, making the tattoos on his skin smoke and sizzle. He tried to pull his hand away, but it was stuck fast, as if welded to Naruto's chest. What is this? He choked out, his voice thin with panic. Naruto lifted his head slowly. The red, slitted eyes of the fox were gone. In their place were two pools of solid, burning crimson. There were no pupils, no sclera, just an endless, incandescent red that seemed to radiate a cold, ancient hatred. The whisker marks on his cheeks were no longer just lines, they were deepening, widening, becoming jagged, black fissures from which a dark, smoke-like energy bled into the air. Then, the markings began to appear. Across his forehead, down his arms, and over his chest, intricate black patterns etched themselves into his skin. They weren't tattoos. They looked as if they were being carved into him from the inside by a shard of pure night. Two of the lines on his forehead curved upwards, extending past his hairline, coalescing into what looked like the nascent nubs of horns. Wreathed in the same black, smoky energy. He had grown, just an inch or two, but his frame was leaner, harder. His orange jumpsuit seemed to hang off him differently. The clothes of a boy now worn by a predator. He opened his mouth to speak, but the voice that emerged was not his own. It was a layered, resonant sound, like stones grinding together in the deepest part of the earth. You wished to feast, the voice rumbled, a sound that vibrated in the bones of everyone who heard it. So, you shall. Naruto's, or the thing that was wearing Naruto's skin, hand shot up and gripped Kageyama's wrist. There was a sickening crunch of bone. Kageyama screamed, a high, piercing shriek of pure agony. The life-draining jutsu didn't just stop, it violently reversed. Kageyama's own life force was now being ripped from him, flowing into Naruto in a visible torrent of dark energy. The rogue ninja began to wither. His skin grayed and cracked, his hair turned white and fell out in clumps. His eyes, wide with terror, sank back into their sockets. He was aging decades in a matter of seconds, his body desiccating, turning to dust and bone while he was still screaming. "Please," he begged, his voice turning to a dry rasp. "Mercy." The being wearing Naruto's face tilted its head, a gesture of cold curiosity. "We do not know the meaning of the word." With a final, convulsive jerk, Naruto tore his hand away, and with it came the last of Kageyama's life. The man's body, now little more than a husk, a fragile shell of dried skin and brittle bone, crumbled into a pile of gray dust that was immediately scattered by the unnatural wind swirling around Naruto. Silence descended upon the bridge. A heavy, terrified silence. The being stood over the dust pile for a moment, and before its crimson gaze swept across the battlefield, it fell upon Zabuza and Haku. Zabuza Momochi, the demon of the hidden mist, a man who had slaughtered his entire graduating class without blinking. A man who had faced armies and lived, felt a sensation he hadn't experienced since he was a small, starving child, pure, unadulterated fear. The monster before him was not a Jinchuriki. It was not a demon sealed in a cage. It was something else. It was a god of slaughter, wearing the face of a child. "Haku," Zabuza breathed, his voice barely a whisper. "Get back." The being took a step. It didn't run. It didn't use a jutsu. It simply moved. One moment it was 50 feet away, the next it was standing directly in front of Zabuza, its hand outstretched, fingers ending in claws of black, hardened energy. It moved with a silent, inexorable grace that was more terrifying than any burst of speed. Zabuza swung the executioner's blade on pure instinct, a desperate, powerful cleave meant to bisect his target. The being didn't even bother to dodge. It raised its free hand and caught the massive slab of steel by the flat of the blade. The metal, which had cut through countless shinobi, stopped dead with a dull clang. Cracks, like spiderwebs, spread across the surface of the legendary sword from the point of impact. Zabuza stared, his mind refusing to comprehend what he was seeing. With a casual flick of its wrist, the being shattered the executioner's blade. The iconic weapon exploded into 1,000 metal shards, the sound echoing like a death knell across the bridge. Zabuza was left holding nothing but a useless hilt. "Insolent child of the mist," the being's voice echoed, seemingly coming from all directions at once. "You style yourself a demon. We will show you what a true demon is." Its clawed hand shot forward, aimed directly at Zabuza's heart. But it never connected. A blur of black and white intercepted the blow. Haku, his face a mask of desperate, tear-streaked resolve, had thrown himself in front of his master. The claws plunged into his chest instead. Haku gasped, a spray of blood erupting from his lips, painting the front of the being's orange jumpsuit a sickening crimson. He looked up, his dark eyes meeting the soulless red gaze of the thing that was once Naruto. He smiled, a faint, sad, and strangely peaceful expression. "Zabuza-sama, live." Haku's body went limp. The sight of Haku's sacrifice, the selfless act of a boy dying for someone he loved, seemed to strike a chord deep within the maelstrom of primal power. A flicker of something, confusion, perhaps pain, crossed the being's face. The solid crimson of its eyes wavered, and for a fleeting second, a hint of blue, of the boy Naruto, broke through. The internal conflict was a schism. The being let out a roar. But this one was different. It wasn't a cry of rage or dominance. It was a scream of pure, undiluted agony. The black markings on its skin glowed with a blinding intensity, and the HORN-like protrusions on its forehead grew an inch longer in a sudden, violent spasm. The power was too much. The vessel was breaking. Naruto's body arched back, and the immense, oppressive energy that had blanketed the bridge erupted outward in a concussive, non-elemental wave. The remaining mist was blasted away in an instant, revealing the gray, churning waters below and the grim, cloudy sky above. The steel railings of the bridge buckled and warped, Sakura and Tazuna were thrown back, shielded only by Kakashi, who had managed to put himself between them and the blast, his back taking the brunt of the force. Zabuza, shielded by Haku's body, was also sent tumbling across the deck of the bridge. Then, as suddenly as it had come, the power vanished. The black markings receded into Naruto's skin, fading like smoke. The crimson light in his eyes died, replaced by the familiar blue, which rolled back into his head as his eyelids fluttered shut. The extra height, the lean hardness, it all melted away, leaving behind the small, exhausted body of a 12-year-old boy. He stood for a single, swaying moment, Haku's body still impaled on his arm, before his knees gave out. He collapsed, pulling Haku down with him, and lay still in a growing pool of Haku's blood. The silence that followed was more profound than the one before. It was a silence filled with shock, horror, and a question that no one dared to ask. Kakashi was the first to move. He pushed himself to his feet, gritting his teeth against the pain in his back. He looked at Sasuke, whose breathing was shallow but steady, the waxy pallor of his skin slowly receding. He looked at Sakura, who was staring at Naruto's unconscious form, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and awe. Then he looked at Zabuza. The rogue ninja was on his knees, cradling Haku's head in his lap. For the first time, Kakashi saw the man's face without his bandages. It was scarred and harsh, but now it was twisted in an expression of raw, unfiltered grief. Tears, actual tears, traced paths through the grime and blood on his cheeks. The boy was too kind, Zabuza choked out, his voice thick and broken. He looked not at Kakashi, but at the sky. I was his tool. And yet, he saw me as something more. He died for me. A slow, rhythmic clapping sound echoed from the end of the bridge. Gato and his army of thugs, 100-strong mob of cutthroats and mercenaries armed with rusted swords and makeshift weapons, had arrived. The short, arrogant businessman stepped forward, a sneer on his face as he surveyed the scene. Well, what a pathetic display, Gato spat, kicking a piece of Zabuza's shattered sword. The great demon of the mist, crying like a baby. And it looks like you took care of that other freak for me. You're all more trouble than you're worth. I was planning to kill you all after you finished the job anyway. This just saves me money. His thugs laughed, a coarse, ugly sound that grated on the raw nerves of everyone present. Zabuza gently laid Haku's head down. He rose to his feet, his movements stiff. He didn't look at his own wounds. He didn't seem to feel them. He turned to face Gato, and the look in his eyes was no longer that of a grieving man. It was the cold, dead gaze of a killer who had nothing left to lose. You, and I, have a final destination, Zabuza said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. We're going to the same place. And I'm going to be the one to escort you through the gates of hell. Kakashi took a step forward. Zabuza, stay out of this, Kakashi, Zabuza said, not taking his eyes off Gato. This is my fight, my penance. He pulled a kunai from his pouch. It was a pathetically small weapon compared to his usual blade, but in his hand, it looked just as deadly. What followed was not a battle. It was a slaughter. Zabuza moved through the mob of thugs like a phantom, a whirlwind of precise, brutal violence. He was heavily injured, outnumbered 100 to 1, but he fought with the fury of a fallen angel. He ignored the blades that stabbed into his back and arms, focusing only on a direct path to Gato. Gato's sneer had long since turned to a rictus of terror. He turned to run, but Zabuza was upon him. The end was swift and brutal. When it was over, Zabuza stood swaying, his body a canvas of mortal wounds, the kunai still clutched in his hand. He turned and stumbled back toward Haku, each step an monumental effort of will. He collapsed beside the boy's body, his strength finally giving out. Haku, he whispered, reaching out a trembling hand to touch the boy's cheek. Is it cold where you are? I hope we can go to the same place. His hand fell, and he lay still. The bridge was finally, truly quiet, save for the mournful cry of a distant gull. Kakashi walked over to Naruto's still form. He gently worked his student's arm free from Haku's body, laying the dead boy down with a quiet reverence. He then knelt beside Naruto, his medical training taking over. He checked his pulse. Strong, but erratic. His breathing was shallow. Kakashi placed a hand on Naruto's chest, channeling a small amount of diagnostic chakra. He recoiled as if burned. Naruto's chakra network was in absolute chaos. It was a tempest. The familiar blue of his own energy was still there, but it was being battered and warped by two other forces. He could feel the malevolent, fiery red of the Nine Tails, thrashing about like a caged and terrified animal. But weaving through it all, dominating both, was a third energy. It was black, silent, and felt impossibly ancient. It wasn't just powerful, it felt fundamental. Like it was a part of the world's very foundation. It was this energy that was slowly, methodically rewriting Naruto's entire chakra system, changing him from the inside out. Kakashi had never seen anything like it. This wasn't a bloodline. Bloodlines were extensions of chakra. This was something that treated chakra as a mere component, a fuel source. Kakashi-sensei. Sakura's voice was small. She had made her way over, her eyes fixed on Naruto. Is he going to be okay? Kakashi didn't know how to answer that. He's alive, he said finally, the words feeling hollow. He looked at the boy, his student, the son of his sensei, and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. What had he unleashed? What had been sleeping inside Naruto Uzumaki all this time? He carefully gathered Naruto into his arms. The boy was light, too light for the immense, terrifying power he had just displayed. He turned to get his team, the living and the dead, off this cursed bridge. High above, perched silently in the branches of a tall cedar on the shoreline, a figure watched the scene unfold. It was cloaked in a simple, dark gray robe, its face hidden behind a smooth, white porcelain mask. The mask was featureless save for a single, stark symbol painted in the center of the forehead, a vertical line intersected by three horizontal bars, a symbol of divine balance and absolute judgment. The figure's gaze was fixed on the small, orange-clad bundle in the silver-haired Jonin's arms. A detached, analytical coldness emanated from it. The seal has broken, a voice, genderless and devoid of inflection, spoke to the empty air. The Kishin awakens. A chaotic remnant of the old world has resurfaced. The figure remained motionless for a long moment, as if committing the scene to an infallible memory. The calamity must be prevented. The anomaly must be judged. I will report to the master. With a flicker, as if an illusion dispelling, the figure vanished without a sound, leaving only the rustling of leaves in its wake. Down on the bridge, Kakashi started the long walk back to Tezuna's house, carrying his unconscious student. The weight in his arms felt heavier with every step, burdened not by the boy's physical form, but by the terrifying, unknown future he now represented. The world had changed today, and Kakashi had a sinking feeling that this was only the beginning. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. The weight of a new crown. The first thing Naruto was aware of was the light. It was a sterile, unforgiving white that pressed down on his eyelids, sharp and painful. The second was the sound. A low, incessant hum that vibrated through the mattress, through his bones, and into the base of his skull. It was the sound of the electrical ballasts in the ceiling lights. A detail he should not have been able to perceive. He opened his eyes. He wasn't in the familiar, cheerful ward of Konoha General. The walls were a stark, unpainted gray, seamless and bare. The only window was a small, reinforced square of glass in the heavy metal door. A quarantine cell. He was a specimen. You're awake. The voice came from the corner of the room. Tsunade, the fifth Hokage, sat on a simple metal stool, her arms crossed, a deep, weary frown etched onto her face. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. A stack of scrolls and medical charts lay on a small table beside her. Naruto sat up, his body feeling strangely tight, like a bowstring pulled taut. Every muscle was coiled, thrumming with a restless energy that felt both foreign and intimately his own. Granny Tsunade, what happened? Where are Sasuke and Sakura-chan? They're fine, she said, her voice clipped. Sasuke is recovering. He was drained, but the Uchiha constitution is resilient. Sakura is shaken, but she's physically unharmed. She didn't move from her stool, her gaze sharp, analytical. It wasn't the look of a caring grandmother figure, it was the look of a doctor examining a volatile, unknown disease. The real question, Naruto, is what happened to you? He swung his legs over the side of the bed. The cold of the floor against his bare feet was a shock, 1,000 tiny needles of sensation. He could feel the texture of the concrete, the faint vibration of someone walking down the corridor outside. He could smell the sharp tang of antiseptic, the faint, opry scent of old bloodstains scrubbed into the floor, the perfume on Tsunade's clothes. It was overwhelming, a sensory assault. I don't know, he said, pressing the heels of his palms against his eyes. I remember the guy, Kageyama. He was hurting them. I got angry. The fox's power came out, but then, something else. He looked at his hands. They were just his hands, calloused from training, but they felt different. They felt like they belonged to someone else. They felt like weapons. Something else is a mild way of putting it, Tsunade said grimly. She stood and walked over, her steps slow and deliberate. She held a hand out, palm up. Give me your arm. He hesitated for a fraction of a second before extending his arm. Her fingers were cool against his skin. She channeled her green medical chakra into him. And he felt it enter his system. He could track its path along his chakra coils, a warm river flowing into a raging, black sea. Tsunade's breath hitched, and she pulled her hand back as if burned. Incredible, she whispered, her eyes wide with a mixture of clinical fascination and deep-seated alarm. It's completely changed. Your entire network. She began to pace, the restless energy of a caged tiger filling the small room. Your coils aren't just healed or reinforced, Naruto. They've been rebuilt. They're thicker, denser, and they're saturated with this other energy. It's not the Kyuubi's. That foul red chakra is still there, but it's been pushed to the side, contained. This other stuff, this black, oppressive energy, it's bonded with your own blue chakra at a cellular level. It's not a parasite. It's not a poison. It is you, now. She stopped and stared at him, her expression one that Naruto had never seen directed at him before. It was a look of profound uncertainty. I can't heal you. There's nothing to heal. This isn't an injury. It's a metamorphosis. Before Naruto could process the weight of that word, the metal door slid open with a heavy clang. Danzo Shimura stood in the doorway, flanked by two Root Anbu in blank, white masks. His bandaged face was impassive, his one visible eye a black, unreadable chip of obsidian. The air in the room instantly grew colder. The oppressive silence of the quarantine cell replaced by a suffocating tension. Danzo's gaze swept the room, cataloging every detail before it settled on Naruto. He didn't speak to him. He addressed Tsunade as if Naruto were a piece of furniture. The council has been briefed on the incident. The reports from Hitaki are alarming. The acid has proven to be more volatile than anticipated. He has a name, Danzo. Tsunade snapped, placing herself between Naruto and the old war hawk. Danzo ignored her. Its power is a threat to the village's stability if left unchecked. It must be placed under my direct supervision for containment and re-education. Root has facilities designed for precisely this kind of work. Absolutely not. Tsunade's voice was low and dangerous. He is a shinobi of Konoha and he is under my command. I will not hand one of my soldiers over to your butchers to be turned into a mindless weapon. He already is a weapon, Tsunade, Danzo countered, his voice as dry as autumn leaves. You saw the reports. He didn't just defeat the enemy, he annihilated him. He turned a man to dust. He shattered Zabuza Momochi's legendary blade with his bare hands. That is not the power of a boy. It is the power of a calamity. A power that must be shackled to Konoha's will. Your sentimentality is a weakness this village can no longer afford. Naruto watched them, his new senses picking apart the scene with terrifying clarity. He saw the subtle tightening of the muscles in Tsunade's jaw, the way her chakra flared just beneath her skin, a prelude to a physical strike. He saw the almost imperceptible shift in the stance of the Root Anbu, their hands moving fractions of an inch closer to the Tonto on their backs. He saw the utter lack of emotion in Danzo's eye, the cold, reptilian focus of a man who saw people not as lives, but as tools to be used and discarded. And for the first time, he didn't feel the need to shout, to scream, to make them notice him. He felt a cold, sharp clarity pierce through his usual emotional turmoil. He was the center of this storm, and his silence was its own form of power. He spoke, and his voice was quiet, steady, and void of the childish whine it had once held. It carried a new resonance that made both Tsunade and Danzo pause. I'm not an acid, Naruto said, his eyes meeting Danzo's single, dark orb. "And I don't belong to you." The statement was simple, a declaration of fact. There was no defiance in it, no anger. Just an unshakable, final truth. Danzo's eye narrowed. He held Naruto's gaze for a long, silent moment. He wasn't looking at the dead last, the loudmouthed brat who painted on the Hokage monument. He was seeing something else in the depths of those blue eyes. Something ancient, unbowed, and utterly lethal. "You will learn your place," Danzo said, his voice a soft, chilling promise. He turned, his cane tapping once on the concrete floor. "This matter is not concluded, Hokage-sama." He and his guards swept out of the room, and the heavy door slammed shut, plunging the cell back into silence. But the tension remained, a toxic residue left in Danzo's wake. Tsunade let out a long, shaky breath, the fight draining from her shoulders. "That old mummy will be the death of me," she muttered, rubbing her temples. She looked at Naruto, a new, grudging respect in her eyes. "You've changed, kid." He didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. After giving him a final, worried look, Tsunade left, leaving him to the humming lights and the crushing silence. Alone, the storm inside him roared back to life. The world was too loud, too bright, too sharp. He closed his eyes, trying to retreat into the familiar landscape of his own mind. He reached for the place where he usually confronted the Kyuubi. The sewer was gone. In its place was a vast, frozen cavern. Jagged shards of black ice, sharp as obsidian, formed the walls and ceiling. The knee-deep water was gone, replaced by a floor of smooth, chillingly cold darkness that seemed to swallow the light. In the distance, he could see the great cage, its bars twisted and broken, as if a battering ram had smashed through them from the inside. The Kyuubi was there, but it was not the titanic, arrogant beast he knew. It was huddled at the back of its ruined prison, diminished, its 9 tails wrapped around itself defensively. T's baleful red eyes were not fixed on Naruto, but on the space before the cage. Looming in the center of the cavern was a shadow. It had no definite shape, just a colossal, humanoid silhouette of pure, silent pressure. It was a hole in the fabric of his mindscape, a being of absolute cold and ancient, slumbering power. It was the source of the black energy. As Naruto watched, a sliver of the Kyuubi's red chakra leaked from the cage. And the shadow figure passively absorbed it, extinguishing it without effort. The fox let out a low, fearful growl. This was his soul now. A frozen wasteland where a caged god cowered before a silent, waking abyss. He fled the mindscape, his heart hammering in his chest, his breath coming in short, sharp gasps. Days bled into one another. He was a prisoner, a walking talking biohazard. People brought him food on trays, leaving it by the door without a word, refusing to meet his eyes. He heard the whispers through the walls. Monster, demon, unstable. The words that had haunted his childhood now had a terrifying new weight. Maybe they had been right all along. He was spiraling, lost in the chaotic noise of his own senses and the terrifying silence of his isolation. When a new sound cut through the din. A faint, rhythmic tapping. It was late, the hospital hushed. The tapping came from the ventilation grate near the ceiling. He stood on the bed and peered up at it. A moment later, the grate was pushed out from the inside, and a face appeared, framed by long, dark blue hair. Hinata Hyuga. Her pale lavender eyes widened when she saw him. She looked terrified, not of him, but of being caught. She put a finger to her lips, then carefully, quietly, wriggled her way through the narrow opening, dropping to the floor with a soft thud. She was wearing simple training clothes, and she clutched a small, porcelain jar in her hands. "Hinata," Naruto whispered, shocked. "What are you doing? You're not supposed to be here." "I know," she whispered back, her cheeks flushed. "The elders forbade it. They said you were dangerous. But I heard the nurses talking. They said you weren't eating. That you wouldn't speak to anyone." The predatory energy coiling in Naruto's gut, the part of him that was now always on edge, always ready for a threat, suddenly flared. He took an involuntary step back, his hands clenching into fists. A low growl rumbled in his chest. Threat, intruder, danger. Hinata froze. Her Byakugan was active, the veins around her temples stark against her pale skin. She could see it. She could see the storm of black and blue chakra raging around him. A terrifying aura of raw, demonic power. But she didn't run. Her gaze looked past the maelstrom, past the monster, and found the boy cowering at its heart. Her expression softened, the fear in her eyes replaced by a deep, aching sympathy. "You look like you're in pain, Naruto-kun," she said, her voice barely a whisper, yet it cut through the internal roar. "I'm sorry." She took a hesitant step forward and held out the small jar. "My mother used to make this. It's an herbal salve, for aches you can't see, for when your spirit feels bruised." Her acceptance was a balm. Tea was the first gentle thing he had experienced since waking up in this cold, gray box. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't disgusted. She was worried. For him. The boy, not the weapon. The coiled tension inside him slowly began to unwind. The oppressive energy that filled the room receded, pulling back into him like a tide. He found he could take a full, deep breath for the first time in days. He reached out and took the jar, his fingers brushing against hers. "Thank you, Hinata," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. The door to his cell crashed open, slamming against the wall with the force of a battering ram. "Get your hands off her." Jiraiya stood there, his white hair bristling, his face a thunderous mask of rage. He had a massive toad scroll strapped to his back, and he looked like he had run all the way from the Fire Country border. His eyes were locked on Naruto, his posture that of a man ready to spring into a fight to the death. "Pervy sage." Naruto blinked, confused. Jiraiya's gaze flickered to Hinata, who was shrinking back, terrified, then back to Naruto. The killing intent radiating from him was suffocating. "I got Tsunade's message. I came as fast as I could." "What did you do to this girl?" "Nothing," Hinata squeaked, stepping in front of Naruto. "He didn't do anything. I came here on my own." Jiraiya's glare softened slightly as he looked at Hinata, but when his eyes returned to Naruto, they were filled with a grim, heavy seriousness. He walked into the cell, his presence seeming to shrink the already small space. He dismissed Hinata with a nod. "Go home, little girl. This is an A-ranked conversation." After a final, worried glance at Naruto, Hinata scurried out of the room. Jiraiya sealed the door, not with the lock, but with a complex ACY barrier that shimmered into existence. He turned to face Naruto, his usual lecherous grin completely absent. "Let me see you, kid," he said, his voice low. He placed a large, calloused hand on Naruto's forehead. A wave of sage chakra, calm and powerful, washed over him. Jiraiya's eyes widened, his breath catching in his throat. He saw it. He saw the maelstrom, the caged fox, and the slumbering abyss that dwarfed it. He pulled his hand back, his face pale. "I've seen markings like this before," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "The black tattoos that appeared on your skin. I saw them in a forbidden scroll locked away in the archives of Mount Myoboku. A scroll so ancient and dangerous that even the great toad sage is afraid to unseal it." He stared at Naruto, his gaze piercing, as if trying to see into his very soul. "This isn't a bloodline as we know it, Naruto. This is something older. The scrolls called them the Kishin. The fierce gods. Fierce gods," Naruto repeated, the words feeling strange on his tongue. "Beings of primal energy," Jiraiya explained, his voice heavy with the weight of forgotten history. "They were the world's raw, untamed forces given form. They existed long before the Sage of Six Paths. Before ninjutsu, before chakra was ever molded by human hands. They were the mountains, fury, the oceans, rage, the silent cold of the abyss. They weren't tailed beasts, sealed away in hosts. They were the world." He took a deep breath. "The Uzumaki clan, your clan, were said to be descended from an order that served these beings. Or, more accurately, tried to keep them dormant. The sealing jutsu that your clan was so famous for. It wasn't originally designed to imprison beasts like the Kyuubi. It was an internal art, developed to suppress the terrifying power that slept in their own blood." A horrifying understanding began to dawn on Naruto. The seal, the cage, the whispers. Jiraiya's final words landed like hammer blows, shattering the last vestiges of Naruto's old reality. "The seal your father placed on you was a masterpiece of fuinjutsu. A double-layered cage, one layer to hold the fox, and a second, Deeper, more powerful layer designed to hold you. To suppress your own heritage. To keep the Kishin dormant. Jiraiya looked at his godson, and for the first time, Naruto saw a flicker of fear in the legendary Sannin's eyes. The seal didn't just break on that bridge, kid. It shattered. What was inside you didn't leak out. It was born. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The Sound of Defiance. Freedom was a conditional, heavily monitored privilege. Naruto was released from the quarantine cell directly into Jiraiya's custody, the Sannin's presence a constant, watchful shadow. They moved him back to his own apartment, but it was no longer a sanctuary. Anbu, loyal to the Hokage, were stationed on the surrounding rooftops, their presence a silent, continuous reminder of his new status, Konoha's most powerful and most feared asset. His friends didn't know how to act around him. Sakura would flinch if he moved too quickly. Kiba's usual boisterous challenges died in his throat, Akamaru whining softly and pressing against his master's leg whenever Naruto got close. Even Shikamaru, the master of nonchalance, couldn't hide the wary, calculating look in his eyes. They looked at him and saw the monster from the bridge. He looked at them and felt a chasm widening with every passing hour. The news that Sasuke had abandoned the village landed like a physical blow. It was the one thing that felt familiar in this strange, new world, the desperate, aching need to save his friend. In the Hokage's office, Tsunade laid out the mission. It was the same desperate, last-ditch plan from a timeline Naruto would never know. A team of genin, led by a newly promoted Chunin, Shikamaru Nara. Sent to retrieve a priceless Uchiha from the clutches of Orochimaru's elite guard. It was a suicide mission. I'm going, Naruto stated. It wasn't a request. Tsunade looked from Naruto to Jiraiya. A silent argument passing between them. Jiraiya gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Fine, Tsunade conceded, her voice tight with reluctance. But Naruto, you are on a very short leash. Any sign of losing control, and this mission is aborted. Do you understand, Crystal? Naruto said, his tone flat. The team gathered at the village gates. Shikamaru, Choji, Neji, and Kiba. They looked at him. The unwanted addition, the ticking time bomb forced upon them. Shikamaru, as leader, stepped forward, a scroll in his hand. All right, this is a drag, but here's the formation, he began. His voice laced with his usual lazy drawl. Kiba, you'll take point. No, Naruto interrupted. Shikamaru blinked, his train of thought derailed. What do you mean, no? Naruto stepped forward, his eyes scanning the forest beyond the gates. The world was a symphony of information to him now. He could smell the disturbed earth on the path ahead, the faint, alien scent of sound ninja who had passed hours before. He could hear the frantic, accelerated heartbeats of his teammates. He could feel the thrum of their chakra, a chaotic blend of anxiety and resolve. Your plan is logical, Naruto said, his gaze still fixed on the trail. You want to use Kiba's nose to track, Neji's eyes for ambushes, and a staggered formation to minimize risk. It's what the academy teaches. It's also slow, predictable, and it will get us killed. Neji's eyes narrowed. And what superior strategy would you propose? The words were sharp, laced with the Hyuga's typical arrogance, but underlined with a genuine, if begrudging, curiosity. Naruto finally turned to face them. His blue eyes were clear and intense, holding a focus they had never possessed before. The enemy knows we're coming. They're expecting us to be cautious. They'll have set traps along the main path, designed to slow us down, to separate us, to pick us off one by one. The longer we take, the further away Sasuke gets. He pointed to Shikamaru. You're the brains. You, Choji, and Kiba will pursue the container Sasuke is in. Your job is singular. Get him back. Ignore everything else. He then pointed to Neji. You're our eyes. You're not going with them. You're coming with me. We're going to take a different path. A different path? Shikamaru asked, a frown creasing his brow. The Sound Four are an elite unit. Splitting our forces is tactical suicide. Not when one of the forces is a surgical strike, Naruto countered. His lips curved into a faint, predatory smile that did not reach his eyes. They're the escort, the guardians, so I'm going to take them off the board. All of them, while you get Sasuke. The sheer, unadulterated arrogance of the statement hung in the air. He was proposing to single-handedly engage 4 of Orochimaru's elite bodyguards, shinobi known to be Jonin-level threats. That's insane, Kiba blurted out, Inuzuka loyalty warring with disbelief. You can't fight them all at once. He can, Neji said. His voice quiet. His Byakugan was active, and he was staring at Naruto, not at his face, but at the raging storm of energy within him. The chakra I'm seeing, it's monstrous. It dwarfs what I saw during the Chunin exams. He isn't boasting. Shikamaru stared at Naruto, truly seeing him for the first time since the mission began. This wasn't the loudmouthed idiot he'd grown up with. This was someone decisive, confident, and radiating an aura of such lethal certainty that it was impossible to dismiss. It was, he grudgingly admitted to himself, the presence of a true leader. Troublesome, Shikamaru sighed, rolling up his scroll. Fine, we'll do it your way. But if this goes south, I'm blaming you. Fair enough, Naruto said. Neji, with me, the rest of you, move. Without another word, Shikamaru, Choji, and Kiba took off, a blur of motion disappearing into the trees. Naruto looked at Neji. They're moving in a straight line, but the sound 4 are looping back. They're setting a trap about 5 clicks from here. We're going to cut through the forest and intercept them before they get there. Point out any chakra signatures you see. I'll handle the rest. They moved. Naruto's speed was breathtaking. He wasn't just running. He was flowing through the forest, his feet barely seeming to touch the ground. Neji, a prodigy famed for his speed, found himself struggling to keep pace. They were moving in a silent, deadly tandem, a guided missile and its targeting system. Ahead, Neji murmured, his Byakugan scanning their path. 4 signatures. They've stopped. It's them. Naruto came to a dead stop, landing silently on a thick branch. Below them, in a small clearing, the sound 4 were resting. Jirobo, the largest, was leaning against a tree. Kitamaru was perched in a web high above. Saken and Uken were bickering quietly. And Tayuya, the fiery red head, was sitting on a rock, idly tapping her flute against her leg. Stay here, Naruto ordered Neji. This won't take long. Before Neji could protest, Naruto was gone. He didn't drop down with a dramatic entrance. He simply appeared in the center of the clearing, a silent, sudden manifestatio. And that made all 4 of them jolt to their feet. Konoha brat, Jirobo growled, slamming his fists together. You're alone. Did your friends abandon you to die? Naruto ignored him. His gaze swept over them, cold and analytical. He was assessing them, weighing them, and dismissing them, all in the space of a heartbeat. I'm your opponent, he stated calmly. The others are a bit preoccupied. Saken sneered. One little genin thinks he can take on the 4 of us. Your arrogance is almost as ugly as your face. Naruto's focus settled on Jirobo. You first. The big ones always fall the hardest. Jirobo roared with rage and slammed his palms on the ground. Earth style. Earth prison dome of magnificent nothingness. The ground erupted around Naruto, rock and soil rising up to form a massive, thick-walled dome, sealing him inside. Jirobo placed his hands on the outside of the prison, a cruel grin on his face. Now, I'll just suck out all your chakra until you're a dried-up husk. This was easier than I thought. From inside the dome, Neji could see Naruto's chakra signature flare. But it wasn't the wild, uncontrolled eruption he had expected. It was a sharp, focused spike. A deep, resonant hum echoed from within the dome. A sound that made the very air vibrate. Cracks began to form on the surface of the rock prison, not from a punch or a kick, but from sheer internal pressure. What is this? Jirobo grunted, pouring more of his own chakra into the jutsu, trying to reinforce it. The humming intensified, and then, with a deafening crack that sounded like a mountain splitting in 2, the entire dome exploded outward. Chunks of rock and earth flew in every direction like shrapnel. Jirobo was thrown backward, his arms mangled from the violent feedback of his own jutsu being shattered. Naruto stood in the center of the crater, completely unharmed. A thin, black aura of his demonic chakra coiled around him like smoke. He hadn't used a Rasengan. He hadn't used a clone. He had just flexed. Before Jirobo could even recover, Naruto was on him, a blur of motion. He delivered a single, precise open palm strike to the larger man's solar plexus. It didn't look like much, but the IM pact lifted Jirobo off his feet and sent him flying into a tree with enough force to splinter the trunk. The big man slumped to the ground, unconscious, his chest caved in. One down. Kitamaru, seeing this from his perch, didn't hesitate. He spat out a volley of hardened, golden webs, each one sharp as a kunai. Don't get cocky, brat. Naruto didn't dodge, he simply walked forward, and the webs he should have impaled him seemed to dissolve a few inches from his skin, neutralized by the oppressive aura of his chakra. Kitamaru's eyes widened in disbelief. This was his spider war bow, his ultimate long-range weapon. And the boy was walking through it like it was a light drizzle. If I can't pierce you from afar, Kitamaru hissed, pulling a new bow from his mouth, this one larger and pulsing with chakra. I'll just have to put enough force behind it to vaporize you. Spider war bow. Terrible split. He drew the string back, a massive arrow of golden chakra forming. But as he aimed, he found he couldn't get a lock. Naruto was moving, but not in a straight line. He was flowing, his movements erratic and impossible to predict. One moment he was to the left, the next to the right, closing the distance with terrifying speed. Kitamaru fired, the arrow screaming through the air. But Naruto was no longer there. Looking for me. The voice came from directly behind him. Kitamaru whirled around, his multiple eyes wide with panic. Naruto was there, clinging to the same web, his hand already on Kitamaru's chest. Too slow, Naruto said. A pulse of black chakra erupted from his palm. Kitamaru didn't even have time to scream. His body went rigid, his eyes rolled back, and he fell from his web like a stone. Two down. Sakin. Let's go, Uken yelled. They rushed Naruto together, a flurry of kicks and punches from multiple directions. You're fast, but you can't fight two of us at once. Naruto met their assault with an effortless grace. He blocked, parried, and redirected their blows, never taking a step back. He was a rock in the middle of a raging river. Parasite demon demolition technique. Sakin roared, lunging forward to merge with Naruto's body. The moment he made contact, he recoiled with a scream of agony. The black aura around Naruto flared, and Sakin's arm, the part that had touched him, sizzled as if dipped in acid. My chakra, it's being eaten. He shrieked in horror. Our power comes from breaking down and controlling another's body, Naruto said, his voice cold. But what happens when you try to merge with something that is poison to you? He grabbed Sakin's afflicted arm and twisted. With a sickening pop, he dislocated the shoulder. He then spun, delivering a precise kick to Uken's temple, sending the twin sprawling. In less than 10 seconds, their coordinated attack had been utterly dismantled. 3 down. Only Tayuya was left. She had watched her comrades fall, her initial shock turning to a cold, simmering fury. She raised her demonic flute to her lips, her fingers dancing over the holes. You really are a monster, she spat. Fine, let's see how your mind handles this. Demonic flute. Phantom sound chains. A haunting, discordant melody filled the air. It was a powerful genjutsu, designed to bind the victim's mind and body in illusionary chains, leaving them helpless. Up in the tree, Neji gritted his teeth, the sound scraping at the edges of his own consciousness. But Naruto just stood there, his expression unchanged. He tilted his head slightly, as if listening to a curious new song. The genjutsu washed over him, seeking to invade his mind. It found the frozen cavern. It found the cowering nine-tailed fox. And it found the vast, silent, abyssal shadow of the Kishin. The genjutsu, a mere flicker of human chakra, touched the edge of that ancient, primal power. Tayuya screamed. She dropped her flute, clutching her head as blood began to pour from her nose and ears. The psychic feedback was catastrophic. Her own technique had been turned against her, not by a counter-genjutsu, but by the sheer, overwhelming wrongness of Naruto's inner world. It was like trying to trap a hurricane in a teacup. The teacup had shattered. What are you? She gasped, stumbling backward, her bravado gone, replaced by raw terror. Naruto walked slowly toward her. He picked up her flute, examining it for a moment. You think you're loyal to Orochimaru, he said, his voice quiet. You think he gave you power, purpose, but you're just a tool. A caged bird who has forgotten how to fly, so you sing for your captor instead. Shut up, she shrieked, lashing out with a wild kick. You don't know anything about me. He caught her leg easily, his grip like iron. I know everything I need to know. I see the same fire in you that I used to have. The anger of being trapped, of being used, of being told what you are by people who don't care who you are. He met her furious, terrified gaze. Orochimaru's cage is small. He offers you power, but he keeps you weak. Dependent. He tightened his grip slightly, not enough to break bone, but enough to make his point. I'm offering you something else. He snapped the flute in two with a sharp crack of wood and bone. The sound echoed in the silent clearing. Chiyuya stared at the broken pieces of her weapon, the source of her power, and her face crumpled. You have a choice, Naruto continued, his voice resonating with that same cold clarity he'd used on Danzo. You can die here, a broken tool for a master who will forget your name by tomorrow. Or, you can live. You can take that fire, that rage, and you can forge it into real strength. You can follow me, and I will show you what it means to have a power that no one can ever take away from you. He had her at his mercy. He could have ended it. But in her defiance, in her caged fury, he saw a reflection of himself. And a cold, calculating part of his new mind recognized her value. Her skills, her knowledge of Orochimaru, her sheer tenacity. A weapon like that was too useful to discard. It just needed to be aimed in a new direction. He let go of her leg. Before she could react, he chopped her once at the base of her neck. Her eyes rolled back, and she collapsed. Unconscious. Naruto stood over the four defeated shinobi of the sound. The fight had taken less than 5 minutes. He turned to the trees. Neji, let's go. Neji dropped down, his face a pale mask of awe and disbelief. He had witnessed not a fight, but an execution. Naruto calmly produced a roll of ninja wire and began to bind the unconscious Chiyuya. What are you doing? Neji asked, his voice strained. The mission is to retrieve Uchiha. We should leave her. The mission has changed, Naruto said, slinging the captive over his shoulder as if she weighed nothing. Alive, high-value prisoner with intimate knowledge of our enemy is more important than a traitor who left of his own free will. This is a better outcome. They returned to the rendezvous point just as Shikamaru's exhausted team was stumbling back, bruised, battered, and empty-handed. They had failed. Sasuke was gone. They all stared in stunned silence as Naruto approached, the unconscious, red-haired sound Kunoichi slung over his shoulder. He walked past them without a word, his expression unreadable, and headed for the path back to Konoha. As they passed through the village gates, the Chunin guards on duty stopped dead. Their mouths agape. They saw the beaten and defeated Sasuke retrieval squad. And they saw Naruto Uzumaki, walking ahead of them all, carrying an enemy shinobi like a prize of war. He didn't look like a hero. He didn't look like a failure. He looked like a conqueror. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. Cages and Kindred Spirits. The Konoha Intelligence Division headquarters was a place built to be forgotten. A brutalist concrete monolith with no windows, it sank deep into the earth beneath the village, a silent testament to the secrets and pain that kept the leaf safe. Naru, shifted the unconscious Chiyuya on his shoulder, the dead weight a strange comfort. He walked through the reinforced steel doors and the air immediately grew cold and stale, thick with the scent of ozone, fear, and old paper. A T&I operative, a man with a scarred face and dead eyes, looked up from his desk. His gaze flickered from Naruto to the red-haired bundle on his back, and his expression went from bored indifference to sharp professional interest. Uzumaki, the man said, his voice a dry rasp. We weren't expecting you. She's a prisoner, Naruto stated, his voice echoing slightly in the sterile entryway. High value. One of Orochimaru's elite. I want her secured, not interrogated. Not yet. The man raised a skeptical eyebrow. That's not usually how this works. Ibiki-sama will want to. I don't care what Ibiki wants. Naruto cut him off, his tone leaving no room for argument. She is my prisoner. She is to be placed in a maximum security cell, given medical attention, and left alone. Those are the Hokage's orders. It was a lie, but one delivered with such absolute authority that the operative didn't question it. He simply nodded and gestured down a long, dimly lit corridor. The cell they gave her was a 6x6 concrete box with a solid steel door. A thin mattress and a bucket were the only furnishings. Naruto laid her down on the cot, the movement surprisingly gentle. He looked down at her face, which, even in unconsciousness, was set in a defiant scowl. He saw the faint brand of Orochimaru's cursed seal on her neck, a dark, three-tomo mark that seemed to pulse with a faint, malevolent energy. A cage on top of a cage. He was turning to leave when a new voice, laced with amusement and a hint of something wild, slithered out of the hallway's shadows. Well, look what the cat dragged in. And I thought my job was getting boring. Anko Mitarashi leaned against the opposite wall, a dango stick in one hand and a kunai idly twirling in the other. She wore her usual fishnet bodysuit and trench coat, and a wide, predatory grin was stretched across her face. Her eyes, however, weren't on the unconscious girl. They were locked on Naruto, and they were shining with a bright, intense, and deeply unsettling recognition. I heard about the show on the bridge, Gaki, she said, taking a slow, deliberate bite of her dango. Turned a man to dust. Broke a legendary sword, and now you're bringing home strays. She gestured with her kunai toward Tayuya. What's the plan? Start a collection. She's an asset, Naruto replied, his voice flat. Anko laughed, a throaty, genuine sound. An asset. Listen to you, playing at being a proper shinobi. Don't lie to me, kid. I know the look. That's the look of a predator who found a new, interesting toy. She shed herself off the wall and sauntered closer, her movements fluid and serpentine. She stopped just a few feet from him, her head tilted. The cursed seal, I can feel it from here. It sings a nasty little song, doesn't it? A little piece of a monster burrowed under your skin. She tapped her own neck, right over the mark Orochimaru had left on her. Mine sings, too, but the song I feel coming off of you, that's not some cheap knockoff jutsu. That's the original album, the one that all the others are just a pale imitation of. Her grin vanished, replaced by a look of raw, dangerous curiosity. What's it like, having the real thing inside you? Does it whisper? Does it want out? Before Naruto could answer, the T&I operative from the front desk reappeared, his expression grim. Uzumaki. The Hokage's office. Now, the council is convened. The Hokage's office was a pressure cooker. Tsunade sat behind her desk, her hands steepled in front of her, a mask of iron control on her face. Jiraiya stood behind her, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable, but the real threat was gathered before the desk. Danzo Shimura, his one eye burning with cold fire, and the two village elders, Homura and Kaharu. Their faces etched with disapproval and fear. You defy a direct mission order, abandon your objective, and bring an enemy combatant into the heart of the village. Kaharu's voice was thin and reedy, but sharp as broken glass. This is an unprecedented breach of protocol. My objective was to protect Konoha's interests, Naruto stated, his voice calm and steady in the face of their collective fury. He stood in the center of the room, not as a child being scolded, but as a commander giving his report. Sasuke Uchiha is a traitor who made his choice. Tayuya is a high-ranking subord, innate of a declared enemy of this village. She possesses intel on Orochimaru's operations, bases, and future plans. Bringing her here alive was the most strategically sound decision. Danzo rapped his cane on the floor. He speaks of strategy, yet his actions reek of sentiment. Or worse, sympathy. This prisoner is a tool of our enemy. By bringing her here, you risk her being a Trojan horse, a vector for Orochimaru's influence. She should have been eliminated in the field. Eliminating a source of priceless intelligence is short-sighted, Naruto countered without missing a beat. That is the thinking of a blunt instrument, not a shinobi. The insult, so calmly delivered, hung in the air. Danzo's eye narrowed to a slit. You are a weapon, boy. And you are becoming a loose cannon. You require a firm hand. A guiding principle, one that I am prepared to provide. Enough. Tsunade's voice boomed, slamming her fist on the desk. The wood didn't crack, but the sound was a physical blow. Naruto's decision was unorthodox, but his reasoning is sound. The prisoner will be interrogated, but not by Root. Her eyes flickered to Naruto, then back to the council. And not by T&I's standard methods, either. She is a cursed seal user. We need an expert. She leaned back in her chair, a shrewd light in her eyes. Anko Mitarashi will be assigned as her guard and handler. She has unique insight. NTO Orochimaru's methods and the psychological toll of the cursed seal. She will be a jailer, not a torturer. We need the girl's mind intact if we're to get anything useful from her. It was a brilliant political maneuver. It placed Tayuya under the watch of one of Konoha's most volatile, yet loyal, shinobi, effectively creating a separate cage that neither Danzo nor Ibiki could easily access. It was a compromise that satisfied no one completely, which meant it was the only viable path forward. Danzo said nothing, but the tightening of his jaw spoke volumes. He had been outmaneuvered. As for you, Naruto, Tsunade said, her gaze pinning him, you were confined to the village until further notice. You will report to Jiraiya for evaluation. We need to understand what you are capable of. She paused. And what your limits are. Dismissed. Naruto turned and walked out of the office, the elders, glares like daggers in his back. He didn't care. He had won. He had protected his asset. He found Anko in Training Ground 44. The Forest of Death. It was her domain, a place of predators and poison, and she was its queen. She was sitting on a massive, coiled snake, a summons that watched Naruto's approach with unblinking yellow eyes. Tayuya was there, too, awake now, and tied to a tree with chakra-infused wires. She was glaring daggers at Anko, a stream of creative, foul-mouthed curses spilling from her lips. And I hope a giant leech sucks out your guts and wears your skin as a party dress, you purple-haired psycho. Tayuya finished, her voice raw. Oh, I like her, Anko chuckled, hopping off her snake. Which dispersed in a puff of smoke. She's got spirit. She turned her attention to Naruto. So, the old hag made me a zookeeper. Looks like you and I are going to be seeing a lot more of each other, Gaki. Her smile was gone. Her eyes were sharp, focused. I heard what happened in the office. You faced down Danzo and the fossils. You're either very brave or very, very stupid. They're afraid, Naruto said simply. Fear makes people predictable. Anko nodded slowly. Yeah, it does. She took a step closer, her body language shifting from relaxed to coiled, ready to strike. But you're not afraid of anything. Are you? Not anymore. That thing inside you, it ate your fear, didn't it? Left nothing but the hunger. He didn't answer. He just watched her. I'm going to find out what you are, she said, her voice dropping to a low, intense whisper. Words are cheap. Let's talk a language we both understand. She moved, a blur of speed, a kunai flashing in her hand aimed for his throat. Naruto reacted on pure instinct, his arm coming up to block, the blade skittering off his skin with a shower of sparks. The black, smoky aura of his Kishin chakra flared to life, wrapping around him like a shroud. Anko's grin returned, wider and more manic than before. There it is, the real you. What followed was not a spar. It was a storm. Anko fought with a wild, joyful abandon. A dance of deadly precision and chaotic unpredictability. Hidden snakes struck from the undergrowth, Senbon laced with paralytic poison filled the air, and her movements were a disorienting blend of acrobatics and raw power. She was all sharp edges and fangs, a whirlwind of controlled chaos. Naruto was her opposite. He was the eye of the storm. He moved with an unnerving, brutal economy. He didn't dodge. He flowed. He didn't block. He redirected. Every strike from Anko was met with an immovable defense, every feint seen through with cold, analytical eyes. He didn't attack, not at first. He just endured, his oppressive black aura neutralizing her poisons before they could touch him, his inhuman strength turning her most powerful blows into glancing impacts. Come on, she goaded, flippin' G backward to avoid a casual backhand that cracked the earth where she'd been standing. Is that all you've got? Are you just going to stand there and let me hit you? Fight me. Show me the monster. He cursed seal markings on her neck began to spread, black tomo swirling across her skin. Her chakra spiked, becoming wilder, more malevolent. Let's see if your monster wants to play with mine. She lunged, her fist wreathed in dark purple chakra. This time, Naruto met her head on. He didn't raise his aura. He just caught her fist in his open palm. The impact was silent, but the shockwave it ducked flattened the grass in a 20-foot radius. Tayuya, still tied to the tree, felt the tremor and her curses died in her throat, her eyes wide with disbelief. Anko's attack was stopped cold. Her cursed seal enhanced strength. enough to shatter boulders, was held in check by his casual grip. She looked from her fist to his calm, crimson-flecked eyes, and her manic grin faltered. She was giving it everything she had. He was barely trying. "You're right," Naruto said, his voice a low rumble. "My power is a part of me. I don't run from it." His grip tightened, and Anko felt the bones in her hand begin to grind together. The dark chakra of her cursed seal sputtered and recoiled, not from a sealing jutsu, but from sheer, instinctual terror. It was the fear of a lesser predator in the presence of an apex. He looked her in the eye, and for a moment, she saw the abyss behind them. The ancient, cold, all-consuming power. But it's not a monster. It's a crown, and I am its king. He released her, pushing her back gently. Anko stumbled, cradling her hand, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The cursed seal markings receded from her skin, the borrowed power fleeing back into its cage. The spar was over. She stared at him, her chest heaving, a complex mixture of fear, awe, and a strange, exhilarating kinship in her eyes. "Okay," she breathed, a slow, genuine smile spreading across her face. It was different from her usual manic grins. This one held respect. "Okay, King, I get it now." They stood in the ruined clearing, two beings marked by a darkness they refused to be ruled by. A bond had been forged, not in words, but in the violent, honest language of power. Later that evening, Naruto walked through the darkened streets of Konoha, the silence of the village a stark contrast to the storm that had been his day. He didn't go to his apartment. He walked to the Hyuga compound. The guards at the gate, members of the branch family, moved to block his path, their faces grim. "The main family is in seclusion. You are not welcome here, Uzumaki." Naruto didn't stop. He walked forward, and the two guards found themselves frozen, pinned by an invisible pressure that radiated from him. It wasn't killing intent. It was just presence. The absolute certainty of a typhoon that does not ask a village for permission to make landfall. He walked past them and into the heart of the compound, his steps echoing on the pristine gravel. He stopped in the center of the main courtyard, before the large house where the clan head resided. Hiyashi Hyuga. Naruto's voice was not loud, but it carried through the entire compound. As clear and sharp as a bell. "Come out. We need to talk." Lights flickered on. Doors slid open. Figures in formal kimonos appeared on the verandas, their pale, a vendor eyes wide with shock and outrage at this unprecedented intrusion. A moment later, Hiyashi Hyuga, the stoic, unbending leader of the clan, appeared at the main entrance, flanked by several elders. His face was a mask of cold fury. "You have an incredible amount of nerve, boy," Hiyashi said, his voice dangerously low. "To trespass in my home. To demand my presence." "I'm not here to ask for anything," Naruto said, his gaze meeting Hiyashi's without flinching. "I'm here to inform you of a change in policy." An elder scoffed. "You are in no position to." "Hinata visited me when I was quarantined," Naruto cut him off, his eyes never leaving Hiyashi. "She defied your orders to bring me a kindness when everyone else saw a monster. She showed more courage and strength of character in that act than your entire clan has shown in its obsession with fate and destiny." He took a step forward, the pressure of his presence intensifying. "She is the heir to this clan. And she is my friend. From this day forward, you will treat her as such. You will not abuse her. You will not belittle her. You will not place the caged bird seal on her. You will give her the respect she has earned. She is not a tool for you to discard." Hiyashi's hands were clenched into fists at his sides. "You dare to lecture me on the traditions of my own family. Your traditions are a cage," Naruto said, his voice dropping, each word landing with the weight of a stone. "And I have become very, very good at breaking cages." He let a sliver of his true power leak out. Not a flare of chakra, but a wave of pure, oppressive cold. The air grew heavy. The ornamental koi in the nearby pond stopped swimming. The elders flinched back, their faces paling. Hiyashi stood his ground, but Naruto could see it in his eyes. The flicker of shock, the dawning realization that he was not facing the dead last from the academy. He was facing a force of nature that he had no defense against. "Hinata is under my protection now," Naruto declared, the statement hanging in the cold air like a judgment. "If I hear that you have harmed her, or hindered her, in any way, I will come back." And I will dismantle this clan, stone by stone, tradition by tradition. Until nothing is left but the dust. He held Hiyashi's gaze for one final, silent moment, letting the threat sink in. Then, he turned and walked away, the path clearing before him as the assembled Hyuga parted like water before a ship's bow. From a window on the second floor, hidden in the shadows, Hinata watched him go, her hands pressed against the glass. She had seen the entire exchange. Her Byakugan showing her the terrifying, overwhelming power Naruto now commanded. But she wasn't afraid. Tears of gratitude and a fierce, soaring pride welled in her eyes. He had faced down the monster that had haunted her entire life, not for his own gain, but for her. In that moment, her childhood crush, her quiet admiration, solidified into something far deeper. It became an unshakable, unwavering devotion. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. The Arbiter's Judgment. A fragile, uneasy peace had settled over Konoha in the weeks following the failed retrieval mission. It was the quiet of a village holding its breath, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Naruto's name was a whisper in the marketplaces and training grounds, a mixture of fear and a strange, grudging respect. He was a monster, yes. But he was their monster. The Hyuga clan had become unnervingly silent, and Danzo's root, while still a shadow, had ceased its overt political maneuvering. For the first time, Naruto could walk through his own village without feeling the sting of 1,000 hateful glares. They were replaced by something more complicated. Looks of wary, uncertain awe. He was in training ground 7 with Jiraiya. The air thick with humidity and the drone of cicadas. The evaluation had turned into a grueling, relentless training regimen. Jiraiya wasn't teaching him new jutsu. He was teaching him control. Pushing him to his limits, forcing him to draw on the Kishin's power, and then making him rein it in, again and again. Focus, brat, Jiraiya roared, dodging a swipe from Naruto's hand, which was wreathed in black. Smoky chakra. Don't just throw it around. Feel it. Command it. It's a part of you, not a wild animal you've let off the leash. Naruto gritted his teeth, sweat stinging his eyes. He could feel the power thrumming under his skin, a deep, resonant hum that wanted to be unleashed, to shatter, to dominate. It took every ounce of his will to keep it contained, to shape it into a precise, controlled strike rather than an explosive blast. He pulled the energy back, the black aura receding into his skin. He was panting, his muscles screaming in protest. This is harder than learning the Rasengan, he gasped. The Rasengan is just shaping chakra, Jiraiya said, his expression serious. This is shaping your own soul. Now, again. Before he could continue, a single, piercing bell toll echoed from the direction of the Hokage Tower. It wasn't the rhythmic chime for a meeting, it was the emergency signal. One clear, resonant peal that meant a direct, immediate threat to the village itself. Jiraiya's playful demeanor vanished. That's the high alert summons. For an S-rank threat at the gates. In the next instant, they were blurs of motion, racing toward the village center. They weren't the only ones. Shinobi were converging from every direction, a river of green flak jackets and determined faces. But as they approached the main gate, the crowd of Jonin and Chunin were held back, forming a wide, tense perimeter. In the center of the road, standing alone before the massive gates of Konoha, was a single figure. He was a man of average height and build, dressed in simple white robes that seemed strangely out of place. His hair was short and silver, and his face was impassive, almost serene. He held no weapon. His hands were clasped peacefully before him. But the power radiating from him was anything but peaceful. It was a clean, sharp, overwhelming pressure, like the air before a lightning strike. It felt ancient and utterly alien. It wasn't chakra. Tsunade stood at the forefront of the Konoha forces, flanked by Kakashi and Might Guy. Her face was a grim mask. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice amplified with chakra to carry across the distance. "State your purpose." The man in white bowed slightly, a gesture of polite, yet dismissive, formality. "I am Ishida. I am a humble servant of the Celestial Arbiters, the Tenkan." His voice was calm, melodic, but it carried an inherent authority that silenced the nervous murmurs of the surrounding shinobi. "My purpose is simple. A chaotic anomaly, a remnant of a forgotten age, has awakened within your village. Its existence threatens the balance of this world and is a harbinger of the great calamity. His serene eyes, the color of pale gold, swept over the assembled shinobi and settled, with unnerving accuracy, directly on Naruto. "I am here to judge the anomaly known as Naruto Uzumaki," Ishida stated, his voice devoid of malice. It was the simple, irrefutable tone of a man stating a fact of nature. Like, the sun rises or, the tide turns. If it is found to be a threat to the divine order, I am to purge it. A cold fury washed over Naruto. This was the group the observer on the bridge belonged to. The Tenkan. "You're not judging anyone," Naruto growled, stepping forward. Jiraiya put a hand on his shoulder, holding him back. Tsunade took a step forward herself, her fists clenched. "Konoha is a sovereign nation. We do not recognize your authority. Your judgment is not welcome here. Leave now, or you will be treated as an invader." Ishida's serene expression didn't change. "Your authority is a temporary, mortal construct. Ours is eternal. The judgment is not a request." He sighed softly, a sound of genuine, if condescending, regret. "It seems a demonstration is in order to convince you of your place in the grand design." He raised one hand, palm facing the sky. A sphere of brilliant, white light, the size of a fist, coalesced above it. It pulsed with a clean, refined power that made every shinobi in the vicinity instinctively flinch. It wasn't a jutsu. There were no hand signs, no shouted techniques. It was a simple act of will. "He's not aiming for us," Kakashi said, his Sharingan spinning as he tried to analyze the attack. "He's aiming up." Ishida flicked his wrist. The sphere of light shot into the sky, climbing higher and higher until it was a second miniature sun hanging directly over the village. "Let us see the nature of this beast," Ishida said, his voice still calm. "Let us see if it is a protector, or merely a mindless force of destruction. Let the rite of illumination commence." The sphere detonated, not in a fiery explosion, but in a silent, expanding wave of pure light. From the central point, 100 beams of coherent, searing energy rained down upon Konoha. They didn't target the shinobi at the gate. They targeted the village itself. The marketplace, the hospital, the civilian residential district. Panic erupted. The shinobi who had been ready for a fight were thrown into chaos, torn between engaging the enemy at the gate and saving their home. "Defense squads, protect the civilians," Tsunade roared, her orders cutting through the panic. "Kakashi, Guy, with me, we engage." But Naruto was already moving. He saw a beam of celestial energy screaming toward the apartment block where Iruka-sensei lived. He saw another arcing toward the academy, where children were still in class. The cold, analytical part of his mind, the part that had taken over during the fight with the Sound Four, saw the strategic brilliance of the attack. It wasn't meant to kill. It was meant to divide, to cause chaos, to test him. A deep, primal rage filled him. This was his village. These were his people. This outsider, this self-proclaimed judge, dared to threaten them to get to him. "No," Naruto snarled, the sound a low, guttural growl that came from the depths of his being. The Kishin's power erupted, not in a wild, uncontrolled blast, but in a focused, purposeful surge. The black, smoky aura enveloped him, and from his back, 4 massive, fluid tendrils of pure, dark energy erupted, like limbs of solidified shadow. They were not solid, not liquid, but something in between, coiling and uncoiling with a life of their own. 2 of the tendrils shot out with impossible speed, stretching hundreds of meters. One intercepted the beam aimed at the academy, wrapping around the shaft of pure light like a serpent. The celestial energy sizzled and fought against the primal darkness, but the tendril held, absorbing and neutralizing the attack in a shower of black and white sparks. The second tendril did the same for the beam aimed at the residential district, forming a shield of roiling shadow just feet above the rooftops. The other 2 tendrils whipped forward, not at Ishida, but at the ground. They slammed into the earth, and with a heave of unimaginable strength, ripped 2 massive slabs of bedrock, each the size of a house, from the ground. With a roar, Naruto swung them, positioning them like shields to intercept a dozen more incoming beams. The rock vaporized on impact, but it bought precious seconds. Everyone, from Tsunade to the rawest genin, stared in stunned silence. It was a display of power on a scale they had never witnessed. He wasn't just a powerful ninja, he was a one-man defense system, protecting the entire village simultaneously. Ishida watched, his serene expression finally showing a flicker of interest. So, it chooses the role of guardian. How fascinating. The chaos fights to protect the order it is destined to destroy. The rain of light ceased. Ishida lowered his hand. The initial test is complete. Now for the judgment itself. He vanished. One moment he was standing 50 yards away. The next he was directly in front of Naruto, his hand outstretched, palm glowing with the same white, celestial light. Naruto's tendrils whipped back to defend him, moving faster than sound, but they passed through empty air. Ishida had already moved again, appearing at Naruto's side, his glowing palm aimed at his head. Your power is primal, chaotic, Ishida's calm voice echoed, seemingly coming from all directions. It is a blunt instrument. Mine is the power of order, of concept, of light itself. I do not need to be faster than you. I simply need to be where you are not. This was not a battle of speed or strength. It was a battle of fundamental forces. Naruto's dark, physical power against Ishida's teleporting, light-based attacks. A tendril of shadow finally managed to connect, SLA-MMING into Ishida and sending him flying. But he dissolved into motes of light just before impact, reforming a moment later, completely unharmed. Physical force is meaningless against one who is a master of form, Ishida stated. Then I'll just have to break your form, Naruto snarled. He abandoned his defensive posture. The 4 tendrils of shadow coalesced into 2 massive, clawed arms. He stopped, head trying to hit the teleporting arbiter. Instead, he slammed his new appendages into the ground, sending shockwaves of black energy through the earth. The ground itself erupted, the very space around. Ishida warping and cracking under the assault of the raw, chaotic power. Ishida was forced to keep moving, his short-range teleports becoming more frantic as the very ground he tried to stand on became a weapon against him. You see, Naruto roared, pressing his attack. Your order needs a foundation to exist. My chaos can be the foundation, the walls, and the storm that tears it all down. He was learning, adapting. He wasn't just a raging monster, he was a strategic combatant, analyzing his enemy's abilities and finding a way to counter them. He was using his power not just with rage, but with intellect. Seeing his advantage, Naruto lunged. He funneled a massive amount of his Kishin chakra into his fist, the black energy so dense it seemed to drink the light. He punched not at Ishida, but at the space just in front of him, anticipating his next teleport. Ishida appeared directly in the path of the attack. For the first time, his serene mask broke, his eyes widening in shock. He brought his hands up. A barrier of pure, white light forming just in time. The black fist met the white shield. The expected explosion of sound and fury didn't happen. Instead, there was a deafening silence. The 2 opposing forces met, and for a terrifying moment, they annihilated each other. A perfect sphere of absolute nothingness, a void in reality, formed at the point of impact before collapse. Singing on itself with a violent implosion that shattered the ground for 50 feet in every direction. Both Naruto and Ishida were thrown back. Naruto landed hard, skidding across the broken earth, his arm bleeding. The black energy flickering. Ishida was in worse shape. He lay in a heap, his white robes torn and stained. A large, jagged shard of bedrock had pierced him through the shoulder, pinning him to the ground. His celestial light was sputtering, weakened. Naruto pushed himself to his feet, swaying, his breath coming in ragged pants. He had won, but the cost was high. He had poured a massive amount of his power into that final punch, and his body was screaming in protest. He walked over to the fallen arbiter and stood over him. Ishida looked up, a thin trickle of blood running from the corner of his mouth. The serenity was gone, replaced by the grim expression of a zealot who had failed his god. You are stronger than the texts predicted, Ishida coughed, the words strained. The vessel is compatible. The fusion is more complete than we anticipated. It's over, Naruto said, his voice rough with exhaustion. You've lost. A faint, bitter smile touched Ishida's lips. This was not a battle. This was a data point. An assessment. He looked past Naruto, toward the sky. I have failed in my duty to purge you. But my failure has confirmed the prophecy. The power you wield, it is an infection. The more you use it, the deeper it takes root. It will consume you, and then it will consume everything. His golden eyes locked onto Naruto's, and they burned with an unshakable, fanatical conviction. This changes nothing. The master, Kagutsuchi, will not be so lenient. He will not send a single arbiter to test the waters. He will come to burn the sea itself. The calamity is coming, Naruto Uzumaki. And you are its source. Before anyone could stop him, a blinding white light erupted from Ishida's body. It wasn't an attack, it was a self-immolation. By the time Tsunade and the others reached them, there was nothing left but a scorched patch of earth and the lingering, sterile scent of ozone. Naruto stood there, his fists clenched, the arbiter's final words echoing in his mind. He had won the battle. He had protected his village. But as he looked at the faces of the shinobi surrounding him, faces filled with a new, deeper level of fear and awe, he knew that Ishida was right about one thing. This was just the beginning. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. A Mizukage's Invitation. The mist in Kirigakure was a living entity. It coiled through the towering, cylindrical architecture of the village, muffling sound, blurring edges, and tasting of secrets. For Mei Terumi, the fifth Mizukage, it was the perfect metaphor for her rule, a constant, obscuring fog of political intrigue, old hatreds, and the ever-present threat of a bloody past that refused to be buried. She stood at the panoramic window of her office, looking down at the village she was fighting so desperately to drag into the light. Her long, auburn hair was piled high in its intricate knot, and her green eyes, usually so expressive, were narrowed in concentration. In her hand was a scroll, delivered by Hawk that had nearly died of exhaustion. The wax seal was that of her most trusted informant in the Land of Fire, a merchant with eyes and ears in every tea-house from the capital to Konoha. Her two bodyguards, Chojuro and Ao, stood behind her. Chojuro, the perpetually nervous wielder of the Haramakare, fidgeted with the hilt of his massive blade. Ao, the grizzled veteran with a stolen Byakugan hidden beneath his eye patch, was as still as stone, his senses on high alert as always. It can't be true, Chojuro stammered, his voice barely a whisper. A being of light, who called himself a god, and the Konoha Jinchuriki, defeated him. The report is from a reliable source, Ao countered, his tone a low, gravelly rumble. And it's been corroborated by whispers from 3 other independent agents. The details are consistent. A massive energy signature, a celestial attack that targeted the village indiscriminately, and a defense mounted single-handedly by Naruto Uzumaki. The aftermath as a destroyed front gate and a shattered political landscape. Konoha is in an uproar. Mei tapped the scroll against her palm. She had spent years navigating the treacherous currents of her village. A den of vipers where the elders still dreamed of the blood-mist days and powerful clans chafed under her progressive reforms. She was a master of a delicate, brutal balancing act. And now, a tidal wave had just been born in the west. The other villages will be reacting predictably, Mei mused, her voice a smooth, confident alto. Iwagakure will see this as a new weapon and increase their border patrols. Kumogakure will see a threat to their own Jinchuriki's dominance and make aggressive overtures, trying to gauge Konoha's strength. Suna will be cautiously supportive, but Gaara is still a new cage, he can't offer any real aid. They will all act to contain, to measure, to control. She turned from the window, a slow, predatory smile gracing her lips. It was the smile that made her enemies tremble, the one that promised a move on the grand chessboard that no one else had even considered. They see a typhoon and run for cover, hoping to repair the damage after it passes, she said, her green eyes alight with a brilliant, strategic fire. I see a typhoon and wonder, what if I could learn to command the storm? Ao's visible eye widened slightly. Mizukage-sama, you cannot be suggesting an alliance. Mei finished for him. With a monster that can level a god. Why not? Our position is precarious. The other nations see Kiri as a wounded animal, still bleeding from its civil war. They wait for us to grow weak enough to be partitioned, our unique bloodlines absorbed into their own military might. They see us as a prize to be won. She placed the scroll on her desk. This boy, this Naruto Uzumaki, has just declared himself a new great power. Not a village, but a single person. To everyone else, he is a problem to be solved. A weapon to be controlled or a threat to be eliminated. Her smile widened. To me, he is an opportunity. A chance to shatter the old order and build something new from the pieces. She looked at Ao, her gaze sharp and unwavering. Summon the Council of Elders. And prepare a formal diplomatic missive. I'm sending Konoha an invitation. Chojuro looked like he was about to faint. An invitation? Here. But the elders, they'll never agree. They'll see it as inviting a demon into our home. Oh, I know, Mei said, her voice laced with a dangerous sweetness. And I can't wait to hear them argue. It's been so dull lately. The reaction in Konoha was exactly as Mei had predicted. Only more explosive. The council room was a cacophony of outrage. Absolutely not. Kaharu's voice was a shrill shriek. Kurigakure is a nest of savages. They are our enemies. This is a blatant trap. A ploy to lure our Jinchuriki away from the village's defenses and assassinate him. The fifth Mizukage is a known progressive, Tsunade argued, her hands flat on tea. He table as she leaned into the verbal fray. She ended the blood mist era. Opening diplomatic channels could be beneficial in the long term. Or it could be a sign of her desperation, Danzo countered. His voice a chillingly calm counterpoint to the elders' hysteria. She is weak, her position contested. She may be seeking to capture the Nine Tails to solidify her own power. To hand her such a Ippon on a silver platter would be the height of folly. Naruto stood silently beside Jiraiya, listening. He had been summoned to the meeting, a testament to his new, unavoidable importance. He was no longer just a soldier to be sent on missions. He was a political entity, a walking, talking deterrent whose every move had international ramifications. He watched the council argue, seeing not a debate, but a convergence of fears. The elders feared the outside world, their isolationist policies a shield against a history of betrayal. Danzo feared losing control, his every word a maneuver to tighten his grip on Konoha's military power. Even Tsunade, for all her strength, feared the unknown, the political gamble she was being asked to take. Finally, Naruto spoke. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the noise like a razor. Instantly silencing the room. You're all wrong, he said. Every eye turned to him. He met their gazes without hesitation. You're debating this as if we're in a position of strength. As if we have a choice. He took a step forward, his presence filling the room, his newfound confidence and almost tangible force. A being that called itself a god attacked our village. It wasn't from Iwa, or Kumo, or any hidden village. It was something else, something new. Ishida said he was just a messenger. His master, Kagutsuchi, is coming. And we are not ready. He looked directly at the elders. You talk about traps. The real trap is sitting here, doing nothing. Waiting for the next attack. We are isolated. The other great nations see us as a threat now. They won't help us when the Tenkan return. They'll watch us burn and then pick over the ashes. His gaze shifted to Danzo. And you talk about control. You can't control a hurricane. You can either build walls and hope they hold, or you can learn to move with the wind. The Mizukage's invitation isn't a sign of her weakness. It's a sign of her intelligence. She's the only one of the cage who sees what's coming. She's not looking for a weapon to capture. She's looking for an ally to help her survive the coming storm. He had laid bare the core of their situation with a brutal, undeniable clarity. The political posturing, the old grudges, it all seemed petty and foolish in the face of the existential threat he described. I will accept the invitation, Naruto stated, not as a request, but as a decision. We need allies. We need to know who will stand with us when the sky falls. This is the first step. Tsunade looked at her council, at their stunned, silent faces. Then she looked at Naruto, at the boy, who had become a man in a crucible of demonic fire and divine judgment. A slow smile of pride spread across her face. The decision is made, she declared, her voice booming with the finality of a Hokage's decree. Naruto will go to Kurigakure as a special envoy of Konoha. He will choose his own escort. This council is dismissed. Naruto stood in the Hokage's private strategy room, a massive map of the elemental nations spread across a table. Tsunade and Jiraiya were with him. You handled them brilliantly, kid, Jiraiya said, clapping him on the back. For a minute there, you almost sounded like your old man. This isn't a game, pervy sage, Naruto said, his eyes tracing the path from the land of fire to the land of water. The choice of my escort is critical. It needs to send a message. I've already assigned a standard Anbu squad, Tsunade said. 4 of our best. No, Naruto said immediately. Anbu are spies and assassins. They operate in the shadows. Sending them sends a message of mistrust. It says we're expecting a trap. It's a defensive posture. I need to go there from a position of strength, of confidence. He looked up from the map, his gaze firm. I'll need 3 people. First, Kakashi-sensei. Tsunade nodded. A logical choice. He is a world-renowned Jonin. His presence lends legitimacy and tactical oversight. Second, Anko Mitarashi. Tsunade's eyebrows shot up. Anko. She's a specialist in interrogation and tracking. And she's volatile. What message does she send? She sends the message that we are not to be trifled with, Naruto countered. She's a specialist in Orochimaru, who has deep ties to Kiri's darker past. She'll recognize his poison if it's there. More importantly, he added, his voice lowering slightly, she understands what it's like to have a monster under your skin. She's loyal to me, not just to the village. I trust her. Tsunade considered this, a thoughtful frown on her face. It was unorthodox, but she couldn't deny the strange, fierce loyalty Anko had developed for Naruto since their spar. And the third? She asked, almost afraid to hear the answer. Naruto took a deep breath. To Yuya. The silence in the room was absolute. Jiraiya stopped smiling. Tsunade stared at him as if he had grown a second head. You want to take an uncooperative, high-security prisoner of war on a diplomatic mission to a rival village. Tsunade said, her voice dangerously calm. Have you completely lost your mind? She grew up outside the hidden village system, Naruto argued, his voice passionate, insistent. She served Orochimaru for years. She knows the back channels. The criminal organizations, the political climate of the smaller nations that we have to travel through. She understands how our enemies think because she was one. Kakashi-sensei knows the politics of the great villages. Anko knows the scent of a snake. Chiyuya knows the language of the gutter. We'll need all 3. And what's to stop her from simply running the first chance she gets? Jiraiya demanded. Me, Naruto said simply. She knows she can't beat me. And she knows Orochimaru would kill her for her failure. Right now, I'm the only thing keeping her alive. Her survival is tied to mine. That makes her, for the moment, more trustworthy than any Anbu who might have a hidden loyalty to Danzo. It was a cold, ruthless, and utterly logical argument. He wasn't talking about reforming her or saving her. He was talking about using her as a tool, binding her to him through self-interest and fear. It was the kind of strategic thinking that made Jiraiya both proud and deeply unsettled. Tsunade stared at him for a long, hard minute. She saw the son of Minato Namikaze in his strategic mind, but the unbending will, the sheer, terrifying confidence, that was all Kushina Uzumaki. And the cold, pragmatic edge, that was new. That was the Kishin. Fine, she sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. Fine, do it your way. But if this blows up in our faces, Naruto, I'm personally going to send you to the moon. The team gathered at the East Gate an hour before dawn. They were a study in contrasts. Kakashi, relaxed and professional, his one visible eye calm. Anko, buzzing with a restless, feral energy, a wide grin on her face as if she were heading to a festival instead of a diplomatic mission. And to Yuya, she was dressed in simple, durable traveling clothes, her fiery red hair tied back. The cursed seal on her neck was covered by a high collar, and on her wrists were a pair of sleek, black bracers. They weren't shackles, but Naruto had made it clear what they were. Those are chakra suppressors, he had told her in her cell. They'll dampen your connection to the cursed seal. They will also, if I give the command, deliver a jolt of lightning powerful enough to stop your heart. You will not be restrained. You will walk with us as a member of this team. But do not for 1 second forget what you are. Now, she stood apart from the others, her arms crossed, a sullen, furious expression on her face. But beneath the anger, there was a flicker of something else. A wary, watchful intelligence. She was a caged wolf being offered a walk in the woods. She didn't trust the handler. But the scent of the outside world was intoxicating. All right, Naruto said, addressing his mismatched squad. The journey to the coast is 3 days. We'll move fast and we'll travel light. Kakashi, you have point. Anko, you're on our 6. Chiyuya, you're with me. He started off at a brisk pace, not waiting for a reply. The others fell into formation around him. They moved through the pre-dawn gloom, a small, strange procession. The legendary copy ninja, the snake mistress of Konoha, a foul-mouthed kunoichi from the sound, all led by the boy who was becoming a god. The journey was tense, but efficient. They avoided the main roads, cutting through dense forests and forgotten valleys. Chiyuya proved her worth on the first day. As they neared a dilapidated border town known for its black market, she stopped them. "Don't go through there," she grunted, her eyes scanning the town. "It's a hub for one of Gato's old competitors. They're paranoid since his operation went under. They'll spot shinobi a mile away and try to either rob us or sell our position to the highest bidder." She pointed to a narrow, treacherous-looking mountain pass. "That way is harder, but cleaner." Kakashi looked at the pass, then back at Naruto, raising a questioning eyebrow. "We take the pass," Naruto said without hesitation, placing his trust in the judgment of his prisoner. Chiyuya's eyes widened slightly in surprise, though she quickly hid it behind her usual scowl. They moved like phantoms, a testament to their collective skill. They were a strange, discordant group, but in motion. They were undeniably effective. Enko's senses, honed in the forest of death, picked up every unnatural sound. Kakashi's Sharingan saw through every potential ambush. Chiyuya's knowledge of the land kept them on the safest, most discreet paths. And Naruto was the calm, decisive center that held it all together. On the third day, they reached the coast. The air grew thick and salty. The port town they arrived at was a ramshackle collection of piers and warehouses, smelling of fish, brine, and desperation. A single, sleek Kurigakure vessel was waiting for them at a private dock. Its flag bearing the four-pronged symbol of the hidden mist, flapping lazily in the sea breeze. Standing on the pier, waiting for them, were two figures. One was a tall, lanky man with a nervous demeanor, a massive, bandaged sword strapped to his back. The other was an older, battle-scarred man with a white eye patch, whose stern gaze swept over them, his hidden Byakugan undoubtedly analyzing every detail. "I am Ao," the older man said, his voice curt. "This is Chojuro. We are to be your escort to Kurigakure, by order of the Mizukage-sama." His visible eye narrowed as he took in Naruto's entourage. He saw Kakashi Hatake, a known quantity. He saw Anko Mitarashi, a dangerous variable. And he saw Chiyuya, a former enemy, walking freely among them. His expression hardened with suspicion. "An unusual diplomatic party," Ao stated. The words an accusation. Naruto met his gaze, his blue eyes as calm and deep as the ocean behind him. "We are an unusual village," he replied. "Lead the way." As the Y boarded the ship and it pulled away from the shore, the mist began to roll in, thick and white, swallowing the coastline. They were leaving the familiar world behind and sailing into the heart of the fog. Toward a meeting that would either forge a new future or ignite a new war. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. The Bloody Mist's Embrace. The ship cut through the water like a silent blade, the world dissolving into an endless expanse of gray mist and the soft, rhythmic lapping of waves against the hull. The journey was a long, tense exercise in silence. Chojuro, the younger of their escorts, spent most of the time nervously polishing the handles of his haramakare, occasionally stealing frightened, awestruck glances at Naruto. Ao, in stark contrast, was a statue carved from salt and suspicion. He stood at the prow, his single eye fixed on the fog, but Naruto could feel the probing, analytical gaze of the hidden Byakugan sweeping over his team, cataloging their chakra, their posture, their very intent. Chiyuya leaned against the railing, her red hair a splash of defiant color against the monochrome sea. She hadn't said a word since they'd set sail, her expression a sullen mask. But Naruto, with his heightened senses, could feel the tension radiating from her. She was a coiled spring, wound tight with a mixture of fear and a strange, unfamiliar excitement. This was the village of the Bloody Mist, a place whose terrifying reputation was whispered even in the dark corners of Orochimaru's lairs. Anko was the only one who seemed to be enjoying herself. She prowled the deck like a caged panther, her grin sharp and predatory, taking in the suffocating atmosphere with a gleeful relish. "I like this place," she murmured to Naruto, her voice a low purr. "It's honest. It doesn't try to hide its fangs behind a smile." As the hours bled into one another, the silhouette of Kurigakure finally emerged from the fog. It was a breathtaking, intimidating sight. A series of colossal, interconnected cylindrical towers rose from the water, their peaks disappearing into the mist above. Waterfalls cascaded down their sides, and rope bridges, impossibly thin and high, connected them. It was a fortress built in the heart of a labyrinth. Designed to be impenetrable, their ship docked in a cavernous, subterranean port, the air thick with the smell of damp stone and torch smoke. The reception was cold. A squad of Kiri Anbu, their masks depicting horned demons, met them at the pier. Their postures were rigid, their killing intent a palpable, chilling aura. They did not greet them as guests, but as prisoners being escorted. Ao led them through a maze of stone corridors and spiraling staircases. There were no welcoming crowds, no diplomatic pleasantries. Just the silent, hostile stares of the few shinobi they passed. The legacy of the fourth Mizukage, Yagura, and his reign of blood-soaked terror was etched into the very stones of this place. Mistrust was the air they breathed. They were shown to a suite of rooms in the central tower. They were spacious, opulent, but the windows were reinforced and the doors had no locks on the inside. A gilded cage. The Mizukage-sama will see you in 1 hour, Ao stated. His tone brooking no argument. You will be escorted to the council chamber. Do not wander. He turned and left, the heavy stone door sliding shut behind him with a final, booming thud. Charming, Anko remarked, stretching languidly on one of the silk-covered divans. Reminds me of Ibiki's guest rooms, only with better decor. This is a test, Kakashi said, his visible eye scanning the room. He ran a finger along the wall, his expression thoughtful. The cold reception, the armed escort, the lack of freedom. They're trying to put us on the defensive. To see how we react to intimidation. Then we don't react, Naruto said. He sat down in the center of the room, his posture relaxed, his hands resting on his knees. We are here at their invitation. We are the guests. The burden of hospitality is on them. We will wait. His calm was infectious. Kakashi leaned against the wall, pulling out his Ika book. Anko began idly sharpening a kunai. Even Yuya seemed to lose some of her tension. Slumping into a chair in the corner with a resentful sigh. They were an island of Konoha calm in a sea of Kiri hostility. An hour later, Ao returned. He led them to the Mizukage's council chamber, a vast, circular room at the apex of the tallest tower. The walls were a single, curved pane of reinforced glass, offering a panoramic, mist-shrouded view of the entire village. In the center of the room was a large, round table, around which sat the elders of Kurigakure. They were a collection of old, hard-faced men and women, their faces a roadmap of scars and bitter memories. They looked at Naruto and his team with open, undisguised loathing. And at the head of the table, seated in a chair that was more of a throne, was Mai Terumi. She was even more striking in person than her intelligence file suggested. Her smile was warm, but her eyes were sharp, intelligent, and held a glint of steel that promised she was no one's fool. She was the picture of grace and power, a single, vibrant flower blooming in a garden of thorns. Naruto Uzumaki, she said, her voice a melodious, welcoming chime that was a stark contrast to the room's oppressive atmosphere. I am Mai Terumi, the Godime Mizukage. I thank you for accepting my invitation and making the long journey to our village. The honor is mine, Mizukage-sama, Naruto replied, his voice respectful but firm. He gave a slight, formal bow. One of the elders, a grizzled old man with a heavily scarred face and a sneer that seemed permanently affixed to his lips, slammed his fist on the table. Enough with the pleasantries. Mizukage, you have brought a demon into our sacred village. The Jinchuriki of the Nine Tails. Has your ambition completely blinded you to the danger? Elder Fubuki speaks his mind. As always, Mai said, her smile not wavering. Though a hint of ice entered her tone. But it is precisely because of the danger facing our world that I asked our guests here. A danger that Konoha has already faced. She looked at Naruto. The reports of your battle with the entity calling itself a celestial arbiter have reached even our misty shores. They are difficult to believe. I would hear of it from you directly. Naruto recounted the battle with Ishida. He spoke clearly, factually, leaving out no detail. He described the celestial light, the indiscriminate attack on the village, the creature. E's strange philosophy of balance and judgment. As he spoke, the room was silent, the elders' initial hostility slowly being replaced by a grudging, fearful attention. The threat he was describing was an enemy beyond their experience. A foe that ninjutsu alone could not defeat. This Kagutsuchi he spoke of, Mei said when he had finished, her expression serious. You believe he will return? I know he will, Naruto said. And he will not come alone. A convenient story, Elder Fubuki spat. A tale designed to make us lower our guard, to trick us into an alliance with our enemies. How do we know this isn't a Konoha plot to destabilize us? Before Naruto could respond, a sudden, sharp hiss echoed through the room. A thick, acrid smoke began pouring from the ventilation ducts in the ceiling. Poison, Ao roared, his Byakugan instantly activating. It's a paralytic agent. The Kiri Anbu guards stationed by the door crumpled to the ground, their bodies spasming. Kakashi and Anko were instantly in motion, forming a defensive perimeter around Naruto. Chiyuya, to her own surprise, found herself pulling a kunai and pressing her back against theirs, a lifetime of combat instinct overriding her prisoner status. The glass walls of the council chamber exploded inward, not from a physical blow, but from the concussive force of dozens of explosive tags detonating simultaneously. Masked shinobi, their headbands bearing a scratched-out Kiri symbol, swarmed into the room. They were rogue ninja, traitors. And at their head was Elder Fubuki, standing not with his fellow council members, but with the attackers. He held a strange, ornate scroll in his hand, its surface glowing with a faint, malevolent light. You see, Mizukage, he sneered, his face twisted in a triumphant, fanatical grin. You bring a demon into our home to protect us from a fairy tale threat, when the real poison has been in our village all along. Your weakness, your progressive ideals, you are the disease. But now, with the power granted to us, we will perform the surgery. He unfurled the scroll. The agents of divine balance see the truth. They have given us the means to purge the rot. The scroll flared with a brilliant, white light. The same celestial energy that Ishida had wielded. A powerful wave of force erupted from it, slamming into the room. It wasn't an attack meant to kill, it was a wave of pure, suppressive energy designed to disrupt and negate chakra. Mei cried out as her own chakra was thrown into turmoil. Ao and Chojuro staggered, their jutsu sputtering before they could be formed. Kakashi's Sharingan flickered and died. The drain suddenly agonizing. Anko's cursed seal flared in pain. Only Naruto seemed unaffected. The black aura of his Kishin power flared to life, not as a raging storm, but as a silent, unbreachable shield. The celestial energy washed over it and parted, like water around a stone. The power of the Kishin was not chakra. It was something older, more fundamental. It could not be suppressed. He's unaffected. One of the rogue ninja shouted in panic. It matters not, Fubuki roared. He is one boy. Kill the Mizukage. Kiri will be reborn in the crucible of the blood mist. The traitors surged forward, their blades aimed at the stunned, vulnerable Mei. Chojuro, despite the interference, moved to intercept them, his face a mask of terror but his actions resolute. He wouldn't make it in time. But Naruto was already there. He moved through the chaos with an impossible, fluid grace, a black-wreathed phantom. He wasn't just fast. He seemed to exist in the spaces between his enemy's movements. A traitor swung his sword, only to find Naruto was no longer in front of him, but behind him, a single, precise chop to the neck dropping him without a sound. Mei watched, her senses reeling from the suppressive wave, her eyes wide with disbelief. It was a dance of lethal efficiency. Naruto flowed through the attackers, his hands, his feet, his elbows becoming weapons. He wasn't using ninjutsu. He didn't need to. Every strike was precise, disabling, and utterly final. He broke bones, dislocated joints, and rendered his opponents unconscious with a terrifying, calm brutality. He was protecting her, not just her, but her guards, her council, the very people who had looked at him with such hatred only moments before. As Naruto carved a path through the traitors, a second wave of attackers burst through the shattered windows. But they were met by a vicious, three-pronged defense. Kakashi, his Sharingan useless, fought with the pure, deadly taijutsu of a seasoned Anbu captain. Anko was a whirlwind of kunai and fangs, her fighting style as wild and unpredictable as she was. And Chiyuya, her face a mask of furious concentration, fought with a savage, street-brawling efficiency. Her initial reluctance forgotten in the heat of battle. They were outnumbered, but they were a wall of Konoha steel. Fubuki, seeing his plan crumbling, let out a desperate roar. Fine. If our divine tool cannot stop the demon, it will unmake you all. He poured all of his chakra into the scroll. The celestial energy within it swelled, becoming unstable. It was no longer a wave, it was a bomb. Mei's eyes widened in horror. He's going to destroy the entire tower. The light from the scroll was blinding. But just as it was about to detonate, a black tendril, impossibly fast, shot from Naruto's back. It bypassed Fubuki and wrapped itself around the scroll itself. With a violent wrench, Naruto tore the artifact from the elder's hands and yanked it toward himself. He GHT the overloading scroll in his bare hands. The celestial light and his own Kishin power met, and the resulting reaction was catastrophic. A silent, concussive implosion of energy erupted from his hands, but it was directed inward. Contained by the sheer force of his will, the black aura around him roiled and thickened, absorbing the blast, swallowing it whole. When the light faded, Naruto was on one knee, his breathing ragged. His hands were burned, the skin blackened and smoking, but already, a faint, dark energy was stitching the flesh back together, the Kishin's power healing its vessel. The scroll was gone, reduced to ash. The fighting had stopped. The surviving traitors stared, their minds unable to process what they had just witnessed. He had swallowed a bomb of pure, divine energy. Fubuki was on the ground, his face a mask of utter disbelief and terror. Impossible. The divine light, it cannot be consumed. Naruto pushed himself to his feet and walked slowly toward the fallen elder. His crimson-flecked eyes were cold, ancient, and filled with a terrifying, absolute authority. He stood over Fubuki, a black-wreathed god of judgment. You speak of divine power. Naruto's voice was a low, dangerous rumble. You were given a candle and thought you could command the sun. He knelt, grabbing the front of Fubuki's robes and hauling him to his feet. Tell me who they are. Tell me who gave you this. The battle was over. The traitors were rounded up, the suppressive effect faded, and a stunned, heavy silence filled the ruined council chamber. Mei Terumi stood amidst the wreckage of her office and the wreckage of her village's trust. Her gaze was fixed on Naruto. He stood with his team, his hands still smoking slightly, his expression grim. He had saved her. He had saved her village from a coup that she hadn't even seen coming. He had proven his story, not with words, but with overwhelming, undeniable action. Later that night, after the chaos had subsided and the prisoners were secured, Mei summoned Naruto, not to the council chamber, but to her private quarters. The mood was no longer formal, no longer political. They were being manipulated, she said, her voice soft. She held up a small, smooth, white stone they had found on Fubuki's body. One of the Tenkan was here, in my village, stoking the fears of my elders, promising them the power to purify Kurigakure. They were a pawn in a much larger game. She looked at Naruto, her green eyes filled with a new, profound understanding. You were right. This is a threat that transcends the borders of our villages. She walked to the window, looking out at the mist. My village is divided. My power is not absolute. To fight this, I need allies I can trust. She turned to face him, her expression a mixture of vulnerability and resolve. Today, you showed me what kind of man you are, Naruto Uzumaki. You protected those who scorned you. You saved a village that was not your own. She stepped closer, the scent of sea salt and cherry blossoms filling the space between them. An alliance between our villages is no longer just a strategic desire for me. It is a necessity, but a true alliance, it must be built on more than just paper and politics. It must be built on a foundation of personal trust, of mutual respect. She reached out and gently took his hand, her fingers tracing the faint, newly healed burn marks. Thank you, she whispered, her voice filled with a genuine warmth and gratitude that went far beyond politics. They stood there for a long moment, the leader of the mist and the boy god of the leaf, two powerful, lonely figures who had found in each other an unexpected, and desperately needed, kindred spirit. The alliance was no longer a question of if, but of how. And in that quiet room, high above the mists of Kurigakure, a bond was forged, not of diplomacy, but of a shared and bloody embrace with a world that was rapidly falling into shadow. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. To pluck the root. The return journey to Konoha was a world away from the tense, silent voyage to the mist. A formal, ironclad alliance had been signed by Mei and Naruto, a document that would send shockwaves through the elemental nations. But more than that, a genuine partnership had been forged in the crucible of Fubuki's betrayal. The Kiri shinobi who escorted them to the coast were no longer hostile guards, but respectful allies. Ao, the grizzled veteran, had even offered Kakashi a grudging nod of respect, a high honor from the infamous Byakugan hunter. Naruto's team was changed. Kakashi watched his student with a new sense of awe, seeing not the boy he'd once trained, but a leader who had stared down a coup and commanded the respect of a cage. Enko's usual manic energy was tempered by a newfound focus. She walked closer to Naruto now, her posture that of a loyal, lethal shadow. The most profound change was in Yuya. She was quieter, her usual stream of curses and insults having dried up. She had fought alongside Konoha shinobi. She had seen Naruto's power up close, not as a captor, but as a defender. She watched him now with a complex, grudging fascination. He had broken her flute, broken her pride, but he had also shown her a form of power and leadership that made Orochimaru's manipulative promises seem like the cheap tricks of a charlatan. The cage she was in was no longer just a prison, it was becoming a confusing, terrifying, and strangely appealing sanctuary. They arrived at the gates of Konoha to a hero's welcome. News of the alliance had preceded them, a diplomatic VCTORY that bolstered Tsunade's position and gave the village a much-needed morale boost. But as Naruto stepped through the gates, his heightened senses immediately told him something was wrong. The IR was thick with a tension that had nothing to do with the Tenkan. It was a sour, internal rot. The gazes of the villagers were still respectful, but they were also laced with fear. The Anbu presence on the rooftops was heavier than it should have been. And beneath it all, Naruto could feel a faint, throbbing network of chakra signatures hidden deep beneath the village, a web of silent, disciplined minds that moved with a singular, unnerving purpose. Root was active. He reported immediately to the Hokage's office. Tsunade and Jiraiya were there, but the celebratory mood he had expected was absent. Tsunade's face was etched with fury and exhaustion. "While you were securing our future, Naruto," she said, her voice a low, dangerous growl, "the past was trying to strangle our present." Jiraiya took over, his expression grim. "Danzo made his move. He used your absence, and the political capital he gained by opposing your reckless mission to consolidate his power within the council. He argued that with you, the village's primary deterrent, gone, Konoha was vulnerable. He used that fear to authorize an expansion of Root's operational authority for the village's protection." "It was a lie," Tsunade spat, slamming her palm on the desk. "He wasn't protecting the village. He was preparing for a takeover. 2 days ago, we caught one of his agents trying to access the clan archives, specifically the section on the Hyuga's main house techniques and the caged bird seal." A cold, deadly calm washed over Naruto. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Danzo wasn't just making a political play. He was targeting his foundation. "Hinata," Naruto said, the name a shard of ice. "He didn't get her," Tsunade said quickly, seeing the storm gathering in Naruto's eyes. "The attempt was clumsy. Rushed. He sent a squad of Root Anbu to the Hyuga compound last night. Their orders were to abduct Hinata Hyuga." "What happened?" Naruto's voice was dangerously quiet. "They underestimated the Hyuga," Jiraiya said, a note of grudging respect in his tone. "Hiashi has been a different man since you confronted him, Naruto. He'd increased security around Hinata, assigning Neji and a team of branch house protectors as her personal guard. When Root made their move, they were met by a wall of gentle fists. It was a bloody, vicious fight, contained entirely within the compound walls. But the most surprising part," Tsunade added, "was Hiashi himself. He fought, not like a clan head directing from the rear, but on the front line, protecting his daughter's door. He was a force of nature. He and Neji took down half the squad themselves. They had won. The abduction had been foiled. But it was a victory that had come at a terrible cost. Several of the Hyuga guards were dead. Neji was severely injured, and the sanctity of one of Konoha's founding clans had been violated, not by an outside enemy, but by the village's own shadow government. Danzo's official story is that it was a rogue element within Root. Agents loyal to Orochimaru, Tsunade finished, her voice laced with disgust. He's disavowed them completely. It's a clean, plausible lie that we can't officially disprove without tearing the village apart in a civil war. So he gets away with it? Naruto asked, his voice still unnervingly calm. Officially, yes, Tsunade said, her eyes burning with frustrated rage. There is nothing I can do through the proper channels that won't ignite a conflict we can't afford right now. She looked at him, a silent, desperate message passing between them. Officially, Naruto nodded slowly. He understood. Tsunade, as Hokage, was bound by laws, by politics, by the need to maintain a fragile peace. He was not. I see, he said. He turned and walked to the door. Naruto, wait, Jiraiya called out, his voice filled with concern. Don't do anything rash. Danzo is a cornered snake. He's most dangerous now. Naruto paused at the door, his back to them. A snake is only dangerous if you let it live. He walked out, leaving the Hokage and the Sannin in a heavy, foreboding silence. He didn't go to the Hyuga compound. Not yet. He went to the Forest of Death. He found Anko in her command post. A fortified bunker hidden beneath a giant, gnarled tree. She was debriefing to Yuya, who was now, by an unspoken agreement, acting as a reluctant consultant on all things related to the criminal underworld. They both looked up as he entered. They saw his face, and the air in the bunker instantly dropped 10 degrees. What's wrong? Anko asked, her usual grin gone, her hand instinctively going to the kunai on her thigh. Naruto told them everything. He laid out Danzo's plot, the attack on the Hyuga, Tsunade's political paralysis. He spoke with a cold, methodical precision. Hat was more terrifying than any scream of rage. When he was finished, Anko was vibrating with a silent, murderous fury. That one-eyed bastard, she hissed. He's been a cancer in this village for decades. It's time someone cut him out. Yuya, surprisingly, was the one who asked the strategic question. You can't just walk up to his base and knock on the door. It's the most heavily fortified, secret location in Konoha. No one knows where the entrance is. That's not entirely true, Anko said, a dark, predatory light entering her eyes. She walked over to a massive, detailed map of Konoha and its surrounding territories that covered one wall. Root is a shadow. It exists in the spaces no one else wants. Old tunnels, abandoned military bunkers, forgotten sewer systems from the founding era. Officially, the entrance is a secret. But I've spent 20 years hunting traitors and missing nin in and around this village. I know all the dark, forgotten corners. Her finger traced a path through a series of old, decommissioned aqueducts, and I know a rat's nest when I smell one. It's still a fortress, Yuya pointed out, her voice sharp with the pragmatism of a survivor. Even if you find the door, he'll have hundreds of brainwashed soldiers inside. Traps, seals. It's a suicide mission. It would be, Naruto said, his gaze meeting Anko's, then to Yuya's. For an army. But we are not an army. He looked at Anko. You are the hunter. You know the terrain. You know how to move unseen. He looked at Yuya. You are the musician. Your genjutsu can disrupt communication, sow confusion, and bypass sensory traps that Anko and I would trigger. His plan was forming, a cold, elegant piece of deadly architecture. This will not be a battle. It will be a purge. Anko, you will be our guide. You will get us inside. Yuya, you will be our ghost. You will use your sound-based techniques to create a blanket of chaos and misinformation, making them think they are being attacked from all sides at once. You will turn their fortress into a madhouse. And what will you be doing? Anko asked, her eyes gleaming. Naruto said, a sliver of the Kishin's cold, absolute power leaking into his voice. We'll be walking down the hallway to the throne room. That night, under the cover of a new moon, 3 shadows detached themselves from the darkness of the forest and slipped into an old, moss-covered storm drain at the edge of the village. Anko led them through a labyrinth of claustrophobic tunnels, the air thick with the smell of decay and stagnant water. Her movements were silent and certain. The confidence of a predator in its natural habitat. They reached a dead end, a solid concrete wall. Here, Anko whispered, pointing to a series of almost invisible seams. A seal-locked entrance, designed to be undetectable. Yuya stepped forward. She didn't have her flute, but she didn't need it. She pressed her ear to the wall, humming a low, discordant note. Her chakra, fine as a needle, probed the seal, mapping its intricate, interlocking formula. It's complex, she murmured, tied to a biological key. But it has a resonance frequency. All seals do. She began to hum a series of complex, shifting melodies, her fingers tapping out a silent rhythm on the cold concrete. It wasn't a jutsu of brute force, but of harmony and dissonance. She was not breaking the lock, she was convincing it that she was the key. With a soft, grinding click, a section of the wall receded, revealing a dark, descending staircase. I'm impressed, Anko whispered, a genuine note of respect in her voice. Shut up and let's go. Chiyuya grumbled, though her cheeks were tinged with a faint flush of pride. They descended into the heart of Root. It was a sterile, cold place of gray corridors and numbered doors, lit by a harsh, artificial light. The air was still, silent, the quiet of a tomb. Now, Naruto said, his voice a low command. Chiyuya closed her eyes. She placed her hands on the tall walls of the corridor and let out a single, pure, high-pitched note. The sound, amplified by her chakra, traveled through the very structure of the base. It was inaudible to the human ear, but to any sensory ninja or detection seal. It was a deafening roar. In the main command center, consoles sparked and monitoring equipment went haywire. Then, she began her true performance. Whispers. The sound of footsteps where there were none. The clash of steel in empty hallways. A scream that echoed from the ventilation system. She turned the entire fortress into a haunted house, a cacophony of tom threats that sent the disciplined Root agents scrambling to counter attacks that didn't exist. While the base was consumed by chaos, Anko led Naruto through a series of maintenance tunnels and unguarded passages, bypassing the main barracks and patrols that were chasing ghosts. It was a masterful infiltration, guided by a hunter's instinct. They finally reached a large, reinforced blast door. This is it, Anko breathed. The command center. Danzo's throne room. Naruto placed a hand on the door. He didn't punch it. He didn't try to break it down. He simply let the black, corrosive aura of his Kishin power seep into the metal. The thick steel groaned, warped, and then crumbled into a pile of metallic dust and slag. He stepped through the opening into the command center. The room was large, circular, filled with monitoring equipment that was now sparking and dark. In the center, on a raised dais, sat Danzo Shimura. He was not alone. Flanking him were his two most trusted guards, Fuyamanaka and Torun Aburame. They stood ready, their expressions grim. Danzo himself was calm, his one visible eye showing no surprise, only a cold, reptilian resignation. He had known this was coming. So, the beast has slipped its leash. Danzo said, his voice as dry as bone dust. I underestimated you, Naruto Uzumaki. I did not believe you had the will to do what is necessary. This isn't about will, Naruto said, his voice echoing in the silent room. Anko took up a position by the door, her kunai drawn, a silent sentinel. This is about consequences. You threatened my friends. You threatened my village's stability for your own ambition. You are a cancer that has been allowed to fester for too long. Everything I have done for Konoha. Danzo's voice rose, a flicker of fanaticism breaking through his calm facade. I have dirtied my hands in the shadows so that others could live in the light. You, with your sentimental attachments, would let the village be weak, vulnerable. I would make it strong, unconquerable. There is no strength in what you do, Naruto countered, taking a slow step forward. Only fear. You don't build. You only control. You don't lead. You only manipulate. You are not the root that nourishes the tree. You are the rot that kills it from within. Empty words, Danzo sneered. He gave a slight nod. Fu, Torun, eliminate him. The two root agents moved as one. Fu's hands flashed through a series of seals for a mind control jutsu, while Torun's body dissolved into a cloud of venomous, microscopic insects. Naruto didn't even look at them. From the shadows behind him, a wave of sound, sharp and dissonant, erupted from the floor. Chiyuya, her part in the chaos complete, had arrived to guard his back. The sound wave slammed into Fu, shattering his concentration and throwing his jutsu into disarray. He staggered, clutching his head, blood trickling from his ears. At the same time, Anko moved, a blur of motion. She spat a glob of summon. D-snakes that intercepted Torun's insect cloud, the two swarms meeting in a gruesome, mid-air battle. She engaged the Aburame directly, her taijutsu a whirlwind designed to keep him from reforming his swarm. Naruto never took his eyes off Danzo. He continued his slow, inexorable walk forward. "You see, Danzo," he said, his voice a low, chilling monologue as the sounds of battle raged around him. "Your mistake was thinking I was alone. You isolate everyone around you. You treat them as disposable tools. I protect my comrades. I empower them. That is the difference between a king and a tyrant." He was at the foot of the dais now. Danzo, for the first time, showed a flicker of fear. He ripped the bandages from his arm, revealing the grotesque sight of a dozen Sharingan eyes embedded in his flesh, all of them staring. From his robes, he drew a short, black blade. "You will not take my dream from me," he snarled, leaping from his chair to attack. Naruto met his charge. He didn't use a jutsu. He didn't flare his demonic chakra. He simply moved, his body a vessel of pure, controlled power. He sidestepped Danzo's blade, his hand shooting out to grip the old man's wrist. There was a sickening crunch of bone. Danzo cried out, the blade clattering to the floor. Naruto's other hand came up, not in a fist, but with two extended fingers. He jabbed them precisely into the pressure points on Danzo's chest, paralyzing his diaphragm. Danzo collapsed, gasping for air he couldn't draw, his Sharingan arm useless, his body broken. He lay on the floor, helpless, looking up at the boy who had so utterly dismantled his life's work. Naruto knelt beside him, his shadow falling over the old war hawk. "It's over." Danzo's one good eye burned with a final, desperate act of defiance. "The village needs me," he choked out. "No," Naruto said, his voice devoid of hatred, devoid of anger, filled only with a cold, final pity. "It needs to be free of you." He placed a hand on Danzo's forehead. A surge of black, Kishin energy flowed into the old man. It didn't destroy his body. It targeted something deeper. It scoured his mind, his soul, erasing the years of hatred, of ambition, of paranoia. It left behind nothing. An empty vessel. The battle was over. Fu and Torun had been subdued. Anko and Tayuya stood panting, bruised but victorious. Naruto stood up, looking down at the now empty shell of Danzo Shimura. He had not killed him. He had done something worse. He had erased him. He had plucked the root, ensuring it could never grow back. It was a dark, ruthless, and necessary act. A king's judgment. "Let's go," Naruto said, turning his back on the ruins of Danzo's dream. "There's a lot of cleaning up to do." Chapter 8 End. Chapter 9. The God of a Dying Heaven. The dawn that followed the fall of Root was unnaturally quiet. The sky was a pale, washed-out gray, and the air in Konoha was heavy, still, as if the village itself was a lung that had just exhaled a lifetime of poison and was afraid to breathe in again. The purge had been swift, silent, and absolute. With Danzo erased and his command structure decapitated, the vast network of Root had crumbled into isolated, confused cells, which were now being methodically dismantled by Anko and Jiraiya's intelligence networks. The cancer was gone, but the wound left behind was deep and raw. Naruto stood on the head of the fourth Hokage, looking down at his village. The wind whipped his hair, cold and sharp. Anko stood a few feet to his left, her usual manic energy replaced by a grim, focused watchfulness. Tayuya was on his right, leaning against the stone with her arms crossed, her expression a mix of sullenness and a strange, uncertain belonging. They were the unlikely triumvirate that had cut out the village's heart of darkness. "It feels strange," Anko said, her voice low. "For the first time since I was a kid, I don't feel like I'm being watched by his spies." "You get used to it," Tayuya grunted, though there was no real venom in it. "Freedom's a bitch. Makes you responsible for your own stupid decisions." Naruto didn't reply. He was listening, not to them, but to the world. His senses, now permanently heightened, could feel the subtle thrum of life in the village below. He could feel the anxious chakra of the shinobi on patrol, the weary energy of Tsunade in her office, the steady, calm pulse of Hinata practicing in the Hyuga dojo. He felt a fierce, possessive protectiveness swell in his chest. This was his. He had bled for it. He had purged its shadows. He would not let it fall. It was then that he felt it. A change in the sky. It started not as a sight, but as a feeling. A subtle pressure change. A sudden, absolute silence as the wind died and the birds stopped singing. The very air began to hum with a high, thin frequency that scraped against the nerves. Then, the light changed. The pale gray of the morning was washed away by a brilliant, impossible gold. It was not the warm, life-giving light of the sun. It was a cold, sterile, and utterly alien luminescence that seemed to emanate from the very fabric of the sky itself. High above the village, a new sun was born. A perfect, white-hot sphere of celestial energy. It pulsed with a power so immense, so pure, that it made Ishida's attacks feel like a child's firecracker. Every shinobi in Konoha, every civilian, looked up, their faces pale with a primal, instinctual dread. This was not a jutsu. This was a violation of natural law. From the heart of this second sun, a figure descended. He did not fall. He simply moved downward with a slow, inexorable grace. Borne on wings of pure, white light. He was beautiful, in the way a perfect, flawless sword is beautiful. His hair was the color of spun gold, and his eyes were twin pools of molten silver. He wore white and gold robes that seemed woven from light itself, and his presence was one of absolute, suffocating authority. He was not a monster. He was a being of terrible, divine perfection. He came to a stop, hovering in the air directly above the center of the village, looking down upon them all as a man might look down upon an anthill. His voice filled the sky, not as a shout, but as a thought implanted directly into every mind in Konoha. Calm, resonant, and utterly final. I am Kagutsuchi, the prime arbiter, the sword of divine balance. You have been judged, people of Konoha. For years, you have harbored a chaotic anomaly. You have allowed it to fester, to grow. You have even, in your ignorance, come to celebrate it. But your gravest sin was committed last night. Kagutsuchi's silver eyes, vast and impersonal as galaxies, settled on the Hokage monument, on the small figure of Naruto standing there. The order of this world, flawed as it is, has its pillars. Danzo Shimura was one such pillar. He was a creature of shadow, a necessary darkness to balance your light. He was a part of the system. You, anomaly, have taken it upon yourself to pass judgment. You have erased him. You have shattered a pillar. Not as a man, but as a god. You have upset the balance beyond repair. This was your final transgression. The prophecy of the calamity can no longer be averted. It can only be cleansed. A wave of pure, oppressive power washed over the village. It wasn't an attack. It was simply the byproduct of his presence. Ninjutsu became sluggish, difficult to mold. The very air felt thick as water. So, the final boss shows up in person. Enko breathed, her hand gripping her kunai so tightly her knuckles were white. He's beautiful, Tayuya whispered, her usual defiance replaced by a stunned, terrified awe. Kagutsuchi raised a single, elegant hand. The cleansing begins. Let there be silence. From his palm, a wave of silver energy expanded, washing over the village. It didn't destroy anything. It simply erased. The morning market, filled with civilians who were just beginning to scream, was enveloped. When the light passed, the people, the stalls, the very cobblestones were gone. A perfect, smooth, glassy crater was all that remained. There was a half-second of stunned silence, and then Konoha erupted into raw, unadulterated panic. No, Tsunade's roar of fury was a physical force. She launched herself from her office window, her body already covered in the markings of the strength of 100 seal. She was a green and black blur, crossing the village N seconds to intercept the descending god. That's my village, you bastard! She screamed, her fist, empowered by a lifetime of stored chakra, aimed directly at Kagutsuchi's serene face. It was a blow that could shatter a mountain. Kagutsuchi didn't even look at her. He simply raised 2 fingers. The air in front of him shimmered and solidified. Tsunade's fist slammed into an invisible, unbreakable barrier, and the force of her own attack was reflected back at her. The shockwave shattered every window for half a mile and sent the Hokage, the legendary Sannin, tumbling back to earth like a broken doll, crashing into a rooftop below. Jiraiya, his face a mask of grim resolve, appeared above Kagutsuchi in a puff of smoke, a massive Rasengan, larger and more violent than any he'd ever created, churning in his hand. Sage art. Massive Rasengan. He plunged it down. Kagutsuchi simply sighed, a sound of weary disappointment. He waved his hand, and the Rasengan, a pinnacle of chakra-shape manipulation, unraveled. It dissolved into a harmless cloud of blue energy that was immediately absorbed into the ambient celestial light. Jiraiya was left exposed, his ultimate attack erased from existence. A spear of golden light materialized in the air and pierced his shoulder, sending him plummeting after Tsunade. This wasn't a fight, it was an execution. Naruto watched, a cold, silent fury building within him. This was his fault. This was his judgment. He leapt from the monument, the Kishin's power roaring to life. Black, smoky tendrils erupted from his back, propelling him toward the god in the sky. Kagutsuchi. The Arbiter finally turned his full attention to Naruto. For the first time, a flicker of something, interest, perhaps, entered his silver eyes. So, the anomaly chooses to face its judgment. Come, then, show me the chaos that you believe can defy order itself. The battle began. It was a clash of fundamental forces. Naruto was a storm of primal, physical power, his shadowy limbs striking with the force of meteors. Kagutsuchi was an avatar of untouchable concepts. He turned the air around Naruto to razor-sharp glass, he bent space to make Naruto's attacks miss, he conjured blades of pure light that could sever the bonds between molecules. The village below became their arena. As Naruto fought, a desperate, heroic defense was being mounted. Hinata stood on the roof of the Hyuga compound, her Byakugan active. Her face pale but her voice clear and strong, ringing with a newfound authority. Squad 7, to the west quadrant. A building is collapsing. Evacuate the civilians. Squad 10. The fire is spreading near the hospital. Use a wide area water jutsu to contain it. She wasn't a timid girl anymore. She was a commander, the strategic nerve center of the village's survival. Her all-seeing eyes guiding the rescue efforts, saving hundreds of lives with her calm, precise orders. In the alleyways and ruins, Anko led what was left of Konoha's combat-capable shinobi in a frantic guerrilla war. They couldn't fight Kagutsuchi, but they could fight his manifestations. Where a conduit of golden energy would anchor itself to the ground to stabilize one of his reality-warping effects. Anko and her teams would attack it, throwing everything they had at it until it shattered, momentarily disrupting the god's control. And high on the rooftops, hidden from the main battle, was Tayuya. She held no instrument. She closed her eyes and began to sing. It was a wild, discordant, and utterly defiant melody. It was a song of pure, chaotic sound. It couldn't harm Kagutsuchi, but as the notes spread through the battlefield, the god's perfect, harmonious celestial energy wavered. His light constructs flickered. The air of absolute authority he projected developed cracks. She was static in his perfect broadcast. A ghost in his divine machine. Suddenly, a new sound cut through the chaos. A roar of water. From the east, a colossal wave, a literal tsunami, rose above the village walls. At its crest stood Maid Terumi, her hands in a seal, her face a mask of grim fury. Behind her were the elite hunter Nin of Kurigakure, their ships just visible on the horizon. It seems we arrived just in time for the party. Mei's voice, amplified by Chojiro's water jutsu, boomed across the battlefield. Water style. Great waterfall technique. The wave crashed down, not on the village, but in a controlled deluge that extinguished the fires and slammed into Kagutsuchi's light constructs. The alliance was holding. Kiri had come. For the first time, a frown marred Kagutsuchi's perfect features. The rot has spread. The other villages have been infected by this chaos. He raised both hands. The golden light in the sky intensified, burning away the mist and steam from Kiri's attack. You mortals cling so desperately to your flawed world. You do not understand. To create a perfect garden, the weeds must be pulled, the soil must be burned and tilled. It is a violent, ugly process. But from it, new, perfect life can grow. The ground of Konoha began to tremble. The Hokage mountain, the symbol of the village, began to crack and groan. Huge fissures raced across the faces of the past leaders. Kagutsuchi was no longer just attacking, he was unmaking the very land itself. He's going to sink the entire village. Kakashi yelled, having just managed to pull the wounded Jiraiya and Tsunade to safety. Naruto was being overwhelmed. He was strong, stronger than he had ever been, but he was fighting a being who could rewrite the rules of the fight at will. A blade of light pierced his shoulder. Another sliced across his leg. He was bleeding, exhausted, the Kishin's power flickering under the sustained assault. He looked down and saw it all. The village he loved crumbling, the allies who had come to his aid being pushed back, the friends who were fighting and dying for him. He had brought this upon them. His power, his judgment, his existence. Kagutsuchi floated before him, his silver eyes filled not with hatred, but with a profound, divine pity. It is over, anomaly. Your chaos has reached its limit. Accept your end. Your sacrifice will be the seed of a new, balanced world. Naruto gritted his teeth, black and red blood dripping from his lips. He thought of Hinata's courage, of Anko's fierce loyalty, of Tayuya's defiant song. He thought of Mei, who had crossed the sea to stand with him. He thought of his parents, who had given him this life, this power, this burden. Kagutsuchi was right. His chaos had reached its limit. The power he was using, the power he was trying to control, wasn't enough. So he would stop trying to control it. He closed his eyes, shutting out the sight of his dying world. He turned his consciousness inward, to the vast, frozen cavern in his soul. The Kyuubi was a distant, cowering ball of fire in its broken cage, and before it, in the center of the cavern, stood the silent, abyssal shadow of the Kishin. The source, the truth of what he was. He had always seen it as something other. Something to be wielded. A tool. A weapon. A crown. He was wrong. It wasn't a crown to be worn. It was him. He walked toward it, not with defiance, not with fear, but with acceptance. He reached out and plunged his hand into the heart of the shadow. On the outside, Kagutsuchi prepared to deliver the final, cleansing blow. He raised his hand to summon, end the light that would erase Naruto from existence. But he stopped. He felt a change, a fundamental shift in the fabric of reality that made even him, a divine being, feel a tremor of unease. The flick, carrying black aura around Naruto vanished. The wind stopped. The sound stopped. All the light on the battlefield, from the fires, from the jutsu, even the celestial glow from Kagutsuchi himself, seemed to bend inward. Drawn toward Naruto as if he were a black hole. He opened his eyes. They were no longer blue with flecks of crimson. They were solid black, voids that contained a chilling, ancient stillness. The horn-like protrusions on his forehead, which had only ever been nubs of energy, now grew, solidified, twisting into a pair of sharp, black, demonic horns. His whisker marks deepened, becoming actual fissures from which pure, primal darkness bled. His body elongated, becoming leaner, harder, a perfect fusion of human grace and demonic power. This was not a Jinchuriki transformation. It was not a borrowed power. This was an ascension, an awakening. Kagutsuchi stared, his serene, perfect face for the first time showing a crack. A hint of something he had never before experienced. Fear. The calamity, the god whispered. His voice no longer a broadcast to the world, but the horrified, personal realization of a being staring at its own extinction. It has begun. Chapter 9 End.